What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show.
I thought, okay, if it went north, where would it go? Basically over India, over Nepal, over the Himalayas, over far western China, into Tajikistan, into Kazakhstan, and it would have wound up in central Kazakhstan. It's where Russia's space program is. So Russia has, you know how we have Guantanamo Bay? It's like in this sort of hostile country, but it's like ours.
Right.
But they have a circle. It's like 60 miles across in Kazakhstan. There happened to be a big runway in a very remote part of this base that like there's nobody that lives near it or anything. And so you could, if you flew there, and it would be like an hour before dawn, you could like refuel it and fly off, and it'd be good. So I said to myself, okay, so if this went to Kazakhstan, you've got a very short list of potential perpetrators because you would have to be, like we're talking about, like infinitely sophisticated, like infinitely clever and crafty and ruthless. Kazakhstan is a client state of Russia. So who's on the plane? Well, there were
Jeff Wise, welcome to the studio, sir.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk with you too because you and I had a chance to talk on the phone for a long time, about a month ago after the podcast that came out in November, which you saw. Yeah. And I wanted to give people some context before we start, but for your chops, just so people know, you obviously have been an aviation reporter for years, all different kinds of publications. You have reported on the MH370 case as like an exclusive for the past, I mean, you do other reporting too, but as like the main focus over the past 10 years. You're currently doing a podcast on it as well. Right. What's the name of that podcast?
The podcast is called Deep Dive MH370.
Okay. Great name.
We'll
put that down in the description. But also, you know, when not to address the 500-pound elephant in the room. Obviously, when I did the last podcasts, there were two of them with Ashton. There was all kinds of drama online after that. That is not something I've ever had to be involved with. It's not something I enjoy being involved with. People obviously get very uptight about this case. But, you know, that aside, you were a guy, what I really appreciated about you not only watching those podcasts, because I didn't know you when you did, but then also talking with me and having a great conversation is that while I was very complimentary of your career in those podcasts and a lot of the work you've done on this case that we're going to get through today, I also threw some funny side rim shots about your theory on this case, and you were beautifully magnanimous about it, and that made me like you. Okay. So I want to be able to litigate some of that today. We'll get to what we get to with it, but what I really want to do is try to set. Like, you did an amazing job of figuring out exactly what happened to where we lost, I guess, like, contact with the aircraft when this happened. And then, obviously, there are some theories that could go on beyond that. But you also did a great job of poking holes or issues into the aftermath over the next couple of years, which we will talk all about today. Right. So I'd like to start at the very beginning, that little monologue aside.
Okay.
When did you when this disappearance happened, how quickly did you pick it up as a story? Was it within an hour or a day?
It took me a little while, actually. I had just filed a story. I was writing a lot for Popular Mechanics at the time, and I'd spent a lot of – sometimes you like just pour yourself into a story. You get exhausted. You're just sick of it. You just want to take a break. And so at this exact moment where this happened, I did not want to deal with it. I did not want to – airplane accidents happen. They're tragic. It's part of what I have been doing and what I was doing at the time is try to understand for the public what happened. People are fascinated by air travel. They're a little bit scared of it. When bad things happen, they want to know why. So for a couple of days, I was just like, it was sort of playing in the background. And then Slate reached out to me. And they were asking if I could cover it. I said, all right, fine. I remember because I was actually sitting in my car, alternate side parking, when the text came through, or the email, I guess. And I was like, oh, I have to cover this story.
Next 10 years of your life.
The next 10 years. I mean, it's not the only thing I've been writing about, but I have, obsession is, I think, a fair word.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's completely unprecedented for a plane to never, I mean, I guess you have like Amelia Earhart back in the 1920s, but for a commercial jetliner to go down or
vanish.
whatever happened to it and never have any evidence recovered. We've never seen that before.
Well, evidence has been recovered, but you're correct, completely unlike any other case we've ever had. Planes disappear all the time. I mean, from Amelia onwards. There was a very famous case in 2009 where an Air France flight, Air France 447, disappeared en route from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. And it took them 2 years to find the wreckage on the seabed. And there were some uncanny coincidences, I would say, between that case and MH370, which happened just a few years later.
Like what?
Well, so Air France 447 disappeared. It was a red-eye flight, as was MH370. It was over water. It had left an area of air traffic control and was in between, over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. You're outside of radar contact. And so the expectation is that you say goodbye to the air traffic controller in South America, and then some hours later you say hello to the air traffic controller in Africa. And the plane just suffered some unfortunate sequence of events, and it crashed. And so it was several hours before anyone realized that it was missing. Well, where is this plane? Because there was a blip that was on the air traffic controller's screens that sort of was the marker where we assume this is where it is. And so they didn't realize that the system was just assuming that that's where it was. They were seeing the plane moving across the screen. Everything seemed to be in order. And so then when MH370 happened, it might be useful to your listeners and viewers to know that the plane took off on a red-eye flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. 40 minutes into its flight, it was over the South China Sea. It had left the last waypoint in Malaysian air traffic control responsibility, a waypoint called Igari, and several seconds later, like several heartbeats later, it goes electronically dark. But it had just entered this area. As I said, Air France 447, several years earlier, had been in this in-between zone. And so that when it disappeared, nobody was looking at it. Nobody was paying attention to it. This Malaysian Airlines MH370 had just left, had said goodnight to Malaysian air traffic control, left the last waypoint. Officially, nobody was responsible for it.
How long, what's the longest period of time where no one's supposed to be responsible for it that it can be legally?
It was legally supposed to be like 3 minutes. Okay. Unlike Air France 447, which was like in this huge international, ocean. Malaysian Airlines was over a fairly small body of water, and it was the air traffic control areas directly abut. But there's a handover period. There's a certain amount of time you say goodbye, hello. But so the air traffic controllers in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam were expecting this plane to come onto their screens, and it just didn't. And they were supposed to wait like 3 minutes, but it was the middle of the night. They weren't expecting anything unusual to happen, like day after day after day. Imagine you spent 20 years sitting in your booth in the middle of the night, and planes come through. Nothing unusual ever happens. And now this plane isn't there. And 3 minutes go by, and 4 minutes go by, and 5 minutes go by. It takes a little while for you to say, wait a minute, I better make a call. Yeah. So it took longer than people expected, but when you look at it in retrospect, it seems like a pretty slapdash effort to find out where this plane went.
Yeah, there was all kinds of confusion with the communication from the government. So I will butcher the names if I try it, but there were two main figures who would talk to the people. There was one. What were their official roles?
Well, the Prime Minister of Malaysia would get up and speak. This is like days later. This is in the sort of the aftermath. And when we in the deep dive MH370 podcast, what we try to do is talk about the timeline that happened in the flight, like we were just talking about being in between two air traffic control areas, and then also the timeline of the mystery unfolding.
Okay.
Like it took people days to realize that, wait a minute, you saw this on military radar? So yeah, it's a fairly complicated sequence of events, which is why my partner Andy Tarnoff and I decided we need to do like a whole
Yes.
We're now 17 episodes in, and we're only like halfway through.
Yeah,
because
it's
there's
really good.
so many. It's a detailed case, and Julian, the reason I'm grateful for you to having me on is because my mission is to try to talk about the case, but also to talk about how we talk about the case. Like, how do you grapple with a case that, as you say, is unprecedented? There's never been anything like this. We have to almost develop a new set of tools to take it apart.
Yeah.
Everything about it is different from anything we've ever seen before.
Yes. I also get really tempted when I'm talking about this topic to jump around because there's so many layers to it. So I'd like to try to do a good job of being organized today.
Right.
You've already laid out some of the story.
Right.
Obviously, some people watching this would have seen the podcasts in November, which are available on Spotify, episode 168 and 169 that I did with Ashton. But after the plane lost contact and we never heard from it again, would you mind just going through the timeline that happens over, say, maybe the next 24 hours or so?
Yeah.
As we know it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, your analogy of trying to keep everything organized, like if you've ever taken apart like your lawnmower carburetor or anything like that, if you've ever done it the wrong way, you'll never do it the wrong way again. You have to take apart. As you take it apart, you have to lay the pieces in the order in which you found them. Because if you then try to put it back together, you've got an extra part.
Yeah.
And you're like, where does this thing go?
Especially if it's me.
So this is a complicated case. And we have to treat it like a carburetor. Like we have to know where everything is. And we have to sort of parse it out carefully. So we were talking about how the plane was 40 minutes into its flight. It was over the South China Sea. Nobody was paying attention to it. It went electronically dark. So it's no longer on the radar screens of the air traffic controllers. It's not sending out any kind of radio transmission. And there's various different ways that a plane stays in contact with people on the Earth. And all of them were turned off or switched off. We don't know exactly. Like, you don't have to turn off your radio. You can just not say anything on the radio, right?
Are there any known technological outlets that exist outside of, say, air traffic control, maybe when we're talking government, military, that would be able to still read a plane that is turned off like that?
Yes. Yes. Okay. And it took a couple days for the public to learn that, in fact, so the plane goes electronically dark. Yeah. More or less simultaneously with that, it makes a hard left turn. It does a U-turn. A U-turn so aggressive that you can't just like plug into the autopilot, like turn me onto this heading. You actually, because if you say I'm on heading 030, I want to go into heading 210, the plane will like do it in a pretty chill way. Civil aviation is about easy maneuvers. Someone did a hard turn. They went back, not exactly the way they came, but more or less reverse course, went back over the Malayan Peninsula, whence they had come, passed over a Malaysian Air Force base called Butterworth, then went over this body of water called the Malacca Strait. And they flew up the middle of it. On one side, you have Thailand. On the other, you have Indonesia. So it sort of avoided those airspaces.
Yeah, can we put a map up, Alessi, if you don't mind, just of this area? You know where the general area is, but continue.
Yeah. And so as it was doing all this, dark, it was being tracked by military radar, which is kind of like a flashlight or a searchlight that's being, in the invisible wavelengths being shined out into the world, and it catches anything that is, it could be a rain cloud, or it could be a plane or a balloon or whatever, a Zeppelin even. So anyway, it is seen flying, doing this maneuver I'm describing. And then it left because just as your flashlight can't go infinitely far out into the cosmos, the radar only covers, maybe let's call it 200 miles or something like that. Okay. So you get to the end of that range, and then you're no longer visible to it. So you go invisible again. So now the plane is somewhere over the Andaman Sea, and it is electronically dark. It's beyond the range of Malaysian military radar. And it is invisible to the world. It is so if somebody has taken this plane, they've gotten away scot-free. Nobody can see them.
Do we know how long that would have been from the U-turn to that point?
An hour.
Like
1 hour.
An hour. Okay.
And so then to me, the core event of this whole mystery happens, which is this box gets turned back on that had been turned off. It's called the satellite data unit. It's a component of the satellite communication system. So when I talk about it, I sometimes call it the SATCOM. I sometimes call it the SDU. And this is the box that is allowing the plane to talk to a satellite that's run by Inmarsat, which is a British-based company that has ties to the U.S. government, UK government, a lot of speculation, spookiness, the usual suspects. But this company will later look into its databases and realize that it has recorded transmissions that were automatically sent between the plane and the satellite, and then onwards to a ground station, and then onwards to London, where it was recorded. So there's been a lot of discussion about how do you turn back an SDU? How do you turn it back on? And then secondarily, why would you turn it back on? And this is everything that we know about the next 6 hours hinges on the fact that this box was turned back on. Because for the next 6 hours, Inmarsat was recording these periodic transmissions that were taking place. So the way the system works, it's a bit like you have a cell phone, right? And it's constantly, even when you're not using it, it's figuring out what the nearest tower is, and it's just saying, hey, I'm here, I'm logged in. And that way, if someone wants to call you, it'll come through because the system knows where you are.
Right.
So the SATCOM on this plane had a similar kind of arrangement where if nobody used this system, which you can use to make calls, you can send data, text, that kind of thing. It's a lot like a cell phone, really. If it didn't hear from the user in an hour, it would say, "Hi, are you still there?" It doesn't want to keep you logged in if you're not there. Maybe you've shut down, maybe you've left and you're now talking to a different satellite because you've gone to a different part of the world. And so so every hour, the satellite is saying, "Hi, are you there?" The plane is saying, "Yes, I'm here." Now, to slightly complicate matters, if something happens, like somebody does use the system, then that clock gets reset. And so twice in the span of the next 6 hours, people at Malaysian Airlines were like, "Damn, where's our plane? Let's call." So twice.
And what does that do? So if it gets reset, how does that affect the data?
It means that the clock starts from then. So if an hour goes by, the satellite says, "Hi, are you there?" The plane says yes. And then another 20 minutes go by and someone calls. Now the system is being used, and so that timer goes on. So it's another hour. It's not really that important, but it wasn't initially when this thing was reported on, it was described as being hourly pings. That's pretty much true, but it's not entirely true because there were these two other events that kind of got in there and messed up the timing.
Got it. But the general pattern was, I understand.
Yeah.
So you also, because you were like the lead role in the Netflix documentary on MH370. What's it called again? I just call it the MH370 doc.
MH370, the plane that disappeared.
Got it. So I think there were 3 parts to that. It's a very good documentary. Hey guys, if you have a second, please be sure to share this episode around on social media and with your friends, whether it's Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, doesn't matter. It's all a huge help. It gets new eyeballs on the show, and it allows us to grow and survive. So thank you to all of you who have already been doing that, and thank you to all of you who are going to do so now. But one of the things you were talking about was, once it got to that point, I want to say when it was over the Andaman Sea, where this starts reading it, you don't know the directionality. So it could be north, it could be moving north, or it could be moving south. Can you explain how that works and why that is the case?
Yes. So we've got these 7 pings, and what do these pings consist of? Now, the Malaysian Airlines at this time was in sort of financial difficulty. So everything that they did, they later went bankrupt in part as a result of this. There's different levels of subscription service that you can get when you sign up for your satellite communications.
Oh my God.
the good one, like when you send each transmission, it includes like where you are, right? From GPS. They had the discount version that didn't have any of those frills, bells, and whistles, right? And so because of that, these signals were just like housekeeping data that didn't really have any purpose unless you were trying to maintain your satellite fleet. So the scientists had this data, and they're like, damn, how do we figure out, is there some way we can use this data to figure out where this plane is? Now, the mere fact that the data existed is extremely interesting because they had assumed that when they started looking for this plane, they assumed that it crashed right where they last saw it, because most plane crashes, things start to go wrong. When things go wrong in an airplane at altitude, they tend to come unglued very quickly. So Air France 447, which we were talking about earlier, it had also sent some automatic transmissions of a different nature. But the plane was eventually found within 5 miles of where those last transmissions were made. So the initial assumption was that this plane is going to be really close to where we last saw it in the Andaman Sea, as you just saw on that map. The fact that it went for 6 more hours, that we were talking earlier about like, this is a crazy case.
Yes.
Okay. Let's just become comfortable with the idea that strange things are going to happen again and again and again.
Yes.
Expectations are going to be defied. This is a defying of expectations right here. The idea that this plane flew for 6 more hours and you're going like, I don't know, 400 or 500 miles an hour, you can go really far in a jet plane in 6 hours. So this plane could be almost not anywhere.
The radius is huge.
The radius is huge.
Yes.
And so what else can we figure out from this data? Is there some other clue? We're scientists. Like, we tease out signals from data all the time. So what can we look at? So they looked at it carefully. They put on their thinking caps, and they realized that there was 2 parts of this metadata that was potentially really interesting. The first one was called burst timing offset, it's often referred to as BTO. BTO is a measure of how long it took the plane to respond when the satellite said, "Hi, are you there?" So the plane says, "Hi, how are you there?" The plane received the message, thought about it in its machine way, and then responded and sent a signal back. So there's 2 components to this time. One is the amount of time it takes light to travel through space, and the other is a well-known computational process. So they can subtract the time for the computational process, and what's left is a light speed time. And from that, you can figure out distance. So from this BTO data, you know how far the plane is from the satellite. And it's just, if you take the universe of all points that are a certain distance from another point, it's a sphere. If you take the intersection of 2 spheres, meaning the surface of the Earth and this first sphere we're talking about, you get a circle. So this plane was somewhere on this circle. Now, you can also rule out, because we knew where the plane basically was when the first ping happened. We know that the maximum speed, this plane can't fly more than about 4/5 of the speed of sound. So you're able to narrow it down. So you have these basically what they call arcs. And for each of these 7 pings, you know that it had to be somewhere on this arc. And there's another step that you can read about on my blog, or we talk about it in the podcast. There's a kind of math that you can do that will actually allow you to derive a path from those arcs.
How does that work?
It has to do with probability and aeronautical performance and a couple of other things. But so let me not get into it right now, if you don't mind.
Okay,
Maybe we
no
could
problem.
circle back to it if you want to get into it. It's like, I feel like it's a fairly long walk.
Okay.
But I would definitely encourage people to, we did a podcast episode called Root that talks about how you do that derivation. So when they had this idea, they thought, well, let's test it on some other planes that we have data on, because they keep data on all planes. And they did it, and it matched pretty well. It doesn't give you an exact line, but it gives you a very narrow probability distribution. So what scientists look for, people tend to think that like scientists like are looking for the answer, but really what they're more commonly looking for is a sort of a probability distribution of like what can the range of answers be, right? Like if your son is growing up, as mine is, and they measure their height every year, and from your child's height each year, they can kind of project into the future as to how tall they're going to be when they're grown up. And of course, the older the kid is, the more accurate it gets. But you don't know if your 8-year-old is 4'2", you know, you can say, well, he might be, 5'6", he might be 5'8".
Big range.
There's a range, and so that's what I'm talking about.
They would have thought I was going to be like 5'5" when I was 8.
Right?
I'm 6'1".
Jay Wheaties.
Yeah.
So anyway, you're able to drive a route, and it has a certain error margin. So it's like we know that this plane was kind of going along this route, plus or minus, let's say, 30 miles. There's a trick, though, because the way that this method works is it's symmetrical. It can either go to the right or it can go to the left. So essentially, however this plane went, and you can do this for any plane, you can use its BTO data to generate the route that it went, to tell you the route that it went. But for every route, there's a mirror that it didn't go. It's like a ghost image. And this is like a very important point when we talk more about the sort of possible alternatives, is which of these paths is the right one and which is the mirror. And the second, so there's and so to resolve that, they realized that there was a second part of the metadata that was useful. This is called the BF, or burst frequency offset. And this, through a set of mathematical techniques, which is even more arcane and took the Inmarsat scientists a couple weeks to figure out, tells you which one was right. And it turns out that when you do the math, the plane went south. So the plane could have gone south, it could have gone north, but we know that the south one is right because we have this metadata called the burst frequency offset that tells us the plane went south. A way to understand this is that the satellite actually was wandering in its orbit. None of this would work except so the satellite system was designed to have a BFO value of 0. It wasn't supposed to have a burst frequency offset, but because the satellite had been in service for longer than its warranted lifespan, so it had started to run out of fuel. It carried fuel that allowed it to adjust its orbit, but it was running low, so they weren't using it. Yeah. So the satellite was going up and down out of the plane of its orbit. And because of that, it was creating a signal. And so when if the plane was going south and the satellite was going south, the difference in its relative frequency would be less than if the plane was going north and the satellite was going south. That's how they basically did it.
The positioning. Got it. Okay. So the theory that emerged saying it would have gone south for 6 hours means that it would have ended up run out of fuel smack dab in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
Correct.
I think the best place to start there is with the pilot, because this is where people tried to go right away. Yeah. With, did we just have a suicidal pilot here? Right. So for people who aren't familiar with the case, who was the pilot, and what did the investigation in the immediate days uncover about his potential culpability with this?
Attention was focused on the pilot really early on because I mentioned earlier that the plane reached the end of Malaysian airspace, right? It was about to leave air traffic control. And they said, good night. And then about a minute later, they passed this waypoint and the plane went dark. You have a minute, and the plane, and in the transmission, the pilot, whose name is the captain of the flight, was Zahari Ahmad Shah. And so how do you, in the space of a minute, if somebody from outside the cockpit had broken in and taken control of the plane, the pilots didn't call Mayday, there's various things that a pilot can do to signal to the air traffic control that he's in trouble, right? It used to be kind of secret, but then they made a movie with the title of the movie was this code that you're supposed to use. So I don't think that many people watch it though, so maybe it's still valid. Anyway, immediately, the fact that somebody made this plane go dark, it's easy to make a plane go dark from the cockpit. Who else could have done it?
Sure.
Because the co-pilot was a young guy who had just gotten his training finished. It was like his first flight. Without having to have a supervisor on board to watch him. So he didn't really know much. It was very clear from the get-go that whoever did this knew a lot about aviation, knew a lot about systems, was, let's just say, sophisticated, right? Mm-hmm. And so focus was on the pilot, the captain. So, okay, what do we know about this guy? Is he a terrorist? Is he a criminal mastermind? Is he deep in debt? What are the red flags of this guy? And if you look at it, I mean, people have various opinions. It's a subjective matter. What do you think about this guy? I look at him and I see a guy who is pretty chill. He seems like he's got a happy family. He doesn't have financial problems. He makes YouTube videos that are about like how to repair a leaky window. Mm-hmm. He just seems very relaxed, good-natured. People interview his friends and colleagues, and he seems really well-liked. He's kind of a pillar of the community. He's one of the most experienced pilots from Malaysian Airlines. There seems to be a striking absence of red flags. Another part of it is that if this was a murder-suicide, which is a heinous thing, yes. Pilots are obviously... I fly recreationally, and I hang out at airports, and a lot of pilots also fly recreationally. So I rub shoulders with professional pilots a lot, and I think that pilots are of a type psychologically. Mm. They are, they have their shit together. You can't be kind of scattered, right, irresponsible, alcoholic. It just doesn't work very well. Pilots are maybe a little uptight. You have to be kind of anal retentive, I think, to be a good
absolutely.
Pilot. You don't want to just wing it.
I hope they're not winging it when I get on those goddamn planes.
And when they do, you hear about it.
Yes.
You hear people get a little unhinged sometimes. But he seemed very psychologically stable in the way that's kind of familiar to pilots. There are cases where pilots commit mass murder suicide. They are rare.
When was the last time we had one of those?
Well, we had a guy like a few months ago attempt it with Alaska Airlines. He was riding in the jump seat and he like reached forward and he tried to put the fire extinguisher in one of the engines. Yeah. But he did not succeed.
Was it a co-pilot or a pilot?
He was a deadheading pilot, so he was catching a ride to somewhere else. Yeah. So,
God damn
but
it.
I actually did a Kindle single about so Malaysian Airlines MH370 happened in 2014. And there was a lot of speculation that Zahar Ahmadshah had committed mass murder suicide. The following year, a young German co-pilot was flying, I want to say from Barcelona to, I'm going to get this wrong, Frankfurt or something. And anyway, he programmed into the autopilot to descend to 0 feet altitude. And he had flown with the same captain before, and the guy had a habit of getting up and going to use the bathroom halfway through the flight. So the guy gets up, goes to the restroom. This young guy locked the door, locked the pilot out. And so on the black box, you can hear him like banging on the door, like screaming, like, let me in, let me in. And the guy just sat in the co-pilot seat and the plane just flew itself into the mountains.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it's really, one of the strange aspects of that case was that the mountains where it crashed was really near where this guy had gone. He was a glider pilot, recreational glider pilot. And so he had flown on these mountains, just flying back and forth along these ridges just for fun. And he'd seen these kind of rock outcroppings that he wound up crashing into.
Now, did they find things in this guy's background that suggested he was pretty fucked up? Or so,
yeah, this is a great point. When they looked at his the Apple screen. What do you call those things? I'm blanking on it. The iPad. They look at his iPad. Thank you. I speak English as my native language. When they looked at his iPad, they found Google searches for MH370, among other things. And this guy had a history of mental illness. He'd actually been grounded for a while because of his mental health issues. So he believed that his career was coming to an end. There have been a handful of other cases where people who have like personal crises in their life have tried to do this kind of thing. Zahari had nothing like that. There was one piece of evidence,
Yes.
which is that he was such an avid, he loved flying so much that he had a flight simulator in his basement. And he had done a flight about a month before where he had flown apparently a similar kind of flight profile to what you would, what it was surmised that he did, which was to fly up the Malacca Straits and then put the plane sort of in the Southern Ocean with no fuel. And then, you know, it's not really known.
Didn't he have, correct me if I'm wrong here, on that particular simulation though, didn't they say that he had just for some reason reset a starting point of a new flight to where that was, like where it crashed in the Indian Ocean and then tried to fly to like Australia or something?
No, it seems like the data was partial. It wasn't a perfectly preserved set of data, and there's been a lot of controversy and speculation about what exactly it reflects. But it seems like he flew up the Malacca Straits, like paused the game, and then kind of manually moved the plane to the southern part of the Indian Ocean. And the kind of thing that like doesn't really make any sense about it is that if you're in the southern Indian Ocean or the northern Indian Ocean or the East Atlantic Ocean, it's like it's just ocean. It's all the same, especially in like kind of a low-res flight simulator like the one he had. So what is the significance of being over the ocean anywhere? Like, what does it even matter where you are? It's not like he was practicing what it would be like to fly for 6 hours in the dark over ocean with no kind of goal other than, I guess, running out of fuel and crashing and dying. It seems like a really weird way to kill yourself.
Certainly to me.
Yeah.
For sure.
Back quite a few years ago now, but I reached out to a psychologist who studied suicide. And I said, first of all, this is a really elaborate, like the whole process, which I think I've given you kind of like a simplified version of everything that happened, but it's a long multi-hour process involving lots of turns and things being turned off and things being turned back on again and overflying Air Force bases and all of this. It seems very complicated. Like, do people kill themselves in complicated ways generally? Because the other cases where people have flown themselves into the ground, they just put the nose down and fly it into the ground to get it over with. Like, if I'm going to jump off a building, I mean, my goal is to hit the ground like hopefully as quickly as possible. I don't want to like do like paraglide off the roof and then like release myself on a bungee cord and then like cut the bungee cord. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like simple and fast, I would think. But she said, look, people are people. People are fundamentally unpredictable. And so, yeah, for the most part, people might do one thing, but she was telling me that she knew of a case where somebody had built like a chainsaw machine for themselves that worked apparently. But, you know, you can't really say definitively that you can't rule anything in or out based on human behavior. But the fundamental thing about MH370 is that whatever theory you want to latch onto, the motivation is not there. Like, there's no reason to fly yourself into the remote southern Indian Ocean for any positive benefit, including even killing yourself.
And it seems like the majority of I previously thought it was all of them, but I did find there were one or two who think maybe it was the pilot. But the majority of the families of the 239 people do not think that happened. Right. And we'll get to it later, but they also don't think that the evidence that was found is from the plane or real. They think it's planted, a lot of them. Right. But it seems like it, and I'm trying to take myself back to that timeline, like then when it was happening. So I was actually living in Rome, in Italy at the time, and I remember this story, but right there at that time, this is when the whole Crimea thing was going on, and that's what everyone was talking, at least in Europe, a little more. So I'm not as familiar with like the exact days, what was happening when, but like how long were they on that pilot theory before they then said, wait a minute, some weird shit happened here. We don't know if it's that.
Well, I think it's important to understand that the official search officials have never issued any kind of theory. I mean, implicitly they think it went into the Southern Ocean because that's where they spent hundreds of millions of dollars in several years scanning the seabed. By the way, you asked about how MH370 and Air France 447 are alike. Air France 447 at the time was the most ambitious seabed search ever carried out. It was like 2 miles deep, and it took them 2 years to do it. MH370 then surpassed that. It took them 3 or 4 years, and it was 3 miles deep, and they wound up searching an area the size of Great Britain, a very huge area. So so implicitly they think that it went south, and implicitly it was probably only the pilot could really be on your suspect list.
Guys, if you're still watching this video and you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please take 2 seconds and go hit it right now. Thank you.
But they've never said we think the pilot did it. And so we're in this weird kind of limbo where everybody wants to know what happened to the plane, and there is like, if you compare it to who shot JFK, since we're kind of like in this numinous realm of conspiracy theories, there's a Warren Commission. There's like an official account of what happened, and you can sort of anybody who isn't buying into the Warren Commission is a conspiracy theorist. But with MH370, right? With MH370, there is no official account, and with no official account, there's no like, you can't say, well, explain this, explain that. In the official report, they said we can't rule out anything really. Yeah,
there's the famous press conference where the guy came out and said, I think he said the exact words, like, it disappeared. We don't know where it is, or something like that. And I don't remember how many days in that was, but something, when you go back and watch the footage, it's very easy to have hindsight bias now that we're watching it. Like, obviously we know 10 years later we still haven't solved this, but still there's something about the tone of how things were delivered that was so sinister. Yeah, it was sinister.
Well, it was sinister, but also like Pollyanna-ish in the same way, where they were like, we know that the relatives are dead. We've done the math. I mean, this was the thing. For the first year and a half, all they had was this data that had been transmitted from this plane as the result of this box being turned on, and nobody could explain how or why this box would have been turned back on. And it seemed me, which struck me as quite uncanny. And so they were very confident and sort of, oh yeah, your relatives are dead. We did the math. And by the way, we've done the math and we know where this plane is, and we're going to get it, and we will find it. And we have the quote that I keep coming back to is, we have a bottle of Moet chilling in the fridge, or chilling nicely in the fridge or something. There was an incredible level of like, yes, we have this in hand. Don't you worry your pretty heads about it.
They said that? A bottle of Moet chilling in the fridge?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And for the most part, the media really bought into it. I mean, I think pretty much every mainstream outlet was like, okay, these guys are going to find this plane. Yeah, it's as good as solved.
Yeah, like you said, it was literally the largest rescue mission ever.
Yeah.
For a plane. I forget the number, Ashton had this right, but the number of countries who were involved, the number of boats that were involved, I don't remember them offhand, but it was nuts. So you think about it, and my head does go to, though, like, they're searching the Indian Ocean. I forget the exact percentage, but like something like 90% of the ocean that we know exists, we haven't even explored. Right. So how possible is the explanation that, oh, well, the ocean is so deep and it's so mountainous down there that it fell into a crevice and no one will ever be able to find it?
So yeah, that becomes the question. It's like we know that it went to this area, but then we search there and it's not there. So why isn't it there? And this is like a major goal of my podcast, is to kind of go through, okay, what are all the possible explanations? The sort of top level explanation might be, well, the ocean is big and the plane is small, so that's why you wouldn't find it. But I was talking earlier, scientists talk about error bars, right? Like, what is the probability distribution? Yes. And we know where this plane was. The arc is like plus or minus like 5 kilometers or something. It's like a couple of miles uncertainty. And so
that's not that much.
It's really not that much. And so it wound up on the 7th arc, the plane it's believed, based on the interpretation of what these signals meant, the assumption is that this plane had been out of fuel for about 3 minutes. And it was descending at, they have 2 data points, 9 seconds apart. And the first one, it was descending briskly. And then in the second one, it's like descending almost nose down. So like somebody has been pushing the plane
right,
like into a vertical dive. And so, and then there was another transmission that would have taken place like 90 seconds later that wasn't. So the plane was probably not in the air for 90 seconds after that. So it would have dived very brief. It would have taken about a minute for that plane to hit the water.
Assuming like a 30,000, 35,000 foot altitude?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so it gives you a very narrow band to look in. Actually, that band was searched really early on, but they just had to keep on making it bigger and bigger because it kept on not finding the plane. So why isn't it there? One explanation is that you mentioned maybe it fell into a crevice or something.
Sure.
And when they searched the seabed, they kind of scanned it back and forth. And like, I'm looking at your table now. It's like a picnic table that has cracks in it. Maybe the plane went to one of these cracks.
Right.
Now, percentage-wise, you would think that would be quite a stroke of luck, right? It just happened to turn out that way. And again, something that we see again and again in this case is like something happens and it was either just a stroke of luck, or is it because something else is going on? And so maybe it fell into a crack. They went back and they searched. They sent these little robot subs down and to look in as many of these little cracks and crevices as they could.
They didn't send James Cameron down?
I would be surprised if they didn't talk to James Cameron. I'm sure he popped up in a few conversations.
Yeah.
So that's one explanation, that it was in this defined area, but they just missed it for whatever reason. The officials themselves don't think that happened. The other possibility is that the plane went into this steep dive, and then the pilot thought, "Wait a minute, what am I doing? This is a terrible idea," and pulled it out and then glided it for like 50 miles. Not impossible, but again, one of these things.
Strictly by the physical projection of the plane at this point, no engine because he's out of fuel.
Correct. Right.
You could go 50 miles like that?
I mean, it is possible that you could get beyond the search area. Now, again, the question is, how likely is that? And then there's a third possibility, which is that it's hard to explain why, in simple terms, like why this is unlikely, but you could have done a series of turns and you could have wound up further north of the search area. And so when they called off the search, having spent a lot of taxpayer money searching this area unsuccessfully and having promised we're 97% confident we're going to find it. So they failed and they wrapped it up. They said, look, we didn't fail. That's not really the right word. We just didn't succeed. And the reason is because the plane did this stuff that we assumed it didn't do, but I guess it must have done. And now it's north of where we looked. But we don't have any money, so goodbye and good luck.
Where are we at this point? Like how long after the
this
initial
is
crash?
Like I want to say end of 2016.
Oh, so okay, a while.
It's a couple years later.
Yeah,
it took them a while. It takes a long time to search a seabed like this.
Yeah.
Look, one thing I want to make clear is I have been sort of critical and skeptical, but what they did was amazing. It was an amazing feat of just technological bravado in searching an area that's 3 miles deep. Like, that's incredible.
Yes.
And it was 1,000 miles from the nearest port. I mean, it was really difficult. I would not want to be in these guys' shoes, like terrible rough seas, everything. So what they did was heroic. Hats off to them. It didn't succeed, and now we need to figure out why it didn't succeed. They said it must be north of the area we searched, but we don't have any money, so we're going to stop. And so they did. And they sort of said, case closed. Then this company comes along that nobody knows who they are. They're called Ocean Infinity. And they say, we are going to search this area, and you only have to pay us if we find it. And we have this new generation of technology. We have these fleet of robot subs that all kind of work together. And
Bounty hunters, basically.
Well, actually, Business Week just had a really long article about this outfit a couple months ago. Yeah, they were treasure hunters. They had invested all of this money. So one of these tax write-off kind of things where like rich guys like want to like it was all really shady.
It always is.
And the archaeologists are like, you're destroying the wrecks, and you're like, no, we're just taking the gold bars, you know. So they basically developed this technology so they could go around the world and look for wrecks. So they're like, we're going to find. So they're thinking, well, okay, we want to scan the seabed and find some nice juicy wrecks, but we're also going to like get the Malaysians to pay for it if we find the plane. So they volunteered. They said, we're going to search this other, and they searched like another whole area the same size. They did it much faster because their technology was better. But they searched the area where the Australian officials had said, we know it's in this other area, but we don't have enough money to search for it. It wasn't there either. So these guys, you know, you've got this kind of shrinking probability distribution. They keep on searching where they know it is, and that area gets smaller and smaller. Yeah. And so the question then becomes like, okay, well, where is it there or not? Is it there or not? Because you said very confidently in that tone that you, I think, very accurately identified, a sort of male overconfidence, white male overconfidence, we can say. You know, so where is it? It's not there.
Now, to get on your timeline with all this, though, you ended up through your blog posting and obviously reporting on all the channels, right? Basically everywhere on this case, you ended up at the forefront of this thing called the Independent Group.
Yes, right.
So that's basically like I'll have you explain the full thing to people, but it's basically like a public crowd campaign to try to solve this case with random people around the world who have sometimes expertise, sometimes just like trying to solve it, right? Coming together with whatever information they can pull to find this plane. Right. When did that first start?
That started in the first few weeks after. Well, when the search officials let it be known that they had this Inmarsat data, and that the Inmarsat data said certain things. It had this. We were talking earlier about what does this data mean. A lot of people who care deeply about the case were like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, how can you tell these things that you say you can tell? And especially the BFO data. And so people were trying to understand what they were talking about. And I had some ideas. I was going on CNN a lot at the time. I was writing about it on my personal blog. On air, I would just talk about the stuff that like everyone agreed on, and that the job of a station like CNN is just to sort of take whatever officials say and sort of restate it. Okay, but I was like really interested in what the data meant. Like, what could we tell about what was happening? And it was like a little bit too technically arcane for an audience like that. So I was writing about it on my blog, and then people would reach out to me, Mike Exner being one of them, and he said, look, this is what this satellite system is. This is who made it. This is where it's located in the plane.
Did you explain off camera or on camera who Mike was? I can't remember. Was that right before camera? We were talking about
that? So Mike Exner is a scientist, engineer who lives in Colorado, and he's worked on satellite communication systems for many years. And so he's very well versed in how they work and what the different parts of it are. So I get this email, or I think it was a comment on my blog, I forget which, but this guy reached out to me. I think we talk about it also in the documentary on Netflix. He reaches out to me. He's laying some technical information on me that's like way above my pay grade. I don't even know what he's talking about, but I reach out to him, and he explains who he is and how he knows this stuff. I start emailing with him. There are some other people who are also blogging about this stuff, and we all kind of get this email chain going. It's all very informal. one of the members pipes up and says, we should call ourselves the independent group. And they did. And like, so this literally random group of internet commenters comes together and forms like, the Wonder Twins. And we start trading information, trading ideas, discussing possibilities, trying to work out where the plane could have gone, et cetera. And like these guys, some of them I like more than others. Some of them I have more respect for than others. But the best of them have like just a truly phenomenal knowledge of physics and engineering and how satellite communication systems work and so forth. So I think we were able to really understand in fairly great detail what these scientists are talking about and what it means for the plane could be. And these guys wind up developing quite a close relationship with the search officials. And when the Australians issue their final report, which is 2016 or 2017, they get thanked by name. They thank the independent group, and they thank some of these individuals like Mike Exner by name.
Wow.
I should hasten to add, by this point, I've long since been kicked out of the independent group.
Right. So I was kind of teeing that one up.
Sure. Because
what year, before I get into this, what year did you come up with that theory we're going to talk about? Like how long after the crash?
So I believe it was June of 2014. So about
3 months after.
June, right?
Okay, so
3 months after so finally the Malaysian government releases the information to explain how we use the BFO data to tell us that the plane went south. Okay, as soon as they explain it, I'm talking to Mike and I say, okay, this definitely, okay, let me back up one little step, which is to say that this all seemed very strange to me. The idea that you would do this elaborate set of things and commit suicide, it seemed to me more likely that that when we knew that it could go north or south, it seemed to me north. Because if you go north, you get to be alive. You get to stay alive.
It's land up there.
It's land. And so I said, this plane probably went north. And I said to my editor at Slate, I want to write an article saying that I think the plane went north. And she said, well, nobody else seems to think it went north. I said, okay, listen. I really want to write this article. If you let me write it and I'm wrong, I will publicly apologize. She said, okay, you're on. So in June, when the officials released their explanation of how the BFO data works, I rolled up my sleeves. I polished my high school math, and I did the calculations, and it took me a while because I was very rusty. But I'm like, oh, I get it. It went south. Like they're right. The BFO data means that it went south.
Right.
So I went to my editor and I said, okay, here's your article explaining where I went wrong. And she said, okay, so she ran it and she said, this is an article explaining where you went wrong. This is not actually an apology, which is what you promised.
Oh, so you had already said the theory that you thought it went north to Kazakhstan.
Right.
At this point. Okay.
I think it was so early that we didn't know that it was Kazakhstan. I thought it was like Central Asia. There was a kind of like nascent uprising in China involving the Uyghur minority.
Yes.
Xinjiang. So anyway, I thought it was there. That turned out to be really off the map. So at this point, I think it would be clear to anybody that I am wrong sometimes. I am not always right, And so
God, sometimes people are unwilling to say that in here. I am too while we're at it.
Well, it's important to acknowledge your flaws. It's not a flaw. I mean, this is the thing. I wrote this piece. I'm like, listen, I was wrong, but we didn't know as much then as we know now. And now we know more. And now I see that I was wrong. We're trying to do the best with what we have.
Yes.
So, but she did make me write a second article explicitly apologizing for, and I still like kind of weaseled out of it by saying, look, I'm not really sorry. I was doing my best. So anyway.
I understand what you mean. Yeah.
But, okay, so I apologize. I have a habit of saying that I'm wrong, but then like being like, but am I really wrong? So anyway, so in June, I'm like, Mike, how does this BFO data get generated? Like, how does this thing work? Like, let's just like break it down for me, because the question I want to know is the BFO data tells us that the plane went south. is there any way that the BFO data could be generated? Let me put it this way. Is there any way that that data could be tampered with? Could you mess with it? Is there any way that a devious, like, let's just say, let's imagine somebody on this plane of kind of unlimited deviousness and skills and resources and everything. Can we say, like, how does this work? Is there a way that it can be interfered with, right? And I remember like standing, I remember where I was standing, where Mike was explaining to me how this data is generated, and realizing that like it comes from a part of the plane that anybody can access. Like there's an unlocked hatch that goes into this thing called the electronics bay. And in the electronics bay, you have all the electronics that control the entire plane.
And where would that be on a standard commercial jet? Like I walk in off the whatever that thing is that connects to the plane and
take a left.
Okay.
Take a left, go into first class. Actually, it was styled as business class on this particular flight. You go up, stay to the left side of the plane, go up to the first toilet. On your right, near the galley, there's going to be a carpet. If you pull up that carpet, there's a hatch. The hatch is not locked.
It's not locked.
It's not locked. And if you go open it up and go down in there, you have all of the computers that feed the navigation system, that control the wings and the ailerons and the rudder.
Is this locked today now?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But I should say that
I'm checking that shit next time I get on a plane.
everything that I'm going to describe,
lock that thing up,
could not happen today.
Okay.
It was a particular it was at a very specific moment in time when this particular technology, like, remember I said that they were subscribing to the cheapest version of Inmarsat that didn't have the GPS embedded. When MH370 disappeared, they started giving GPS embedding for free.
Okay. That's reassuring. It's good to know.
So I could walk you through it piece by piece if you want. It's also in my podcast. It's also in my book, which I should have mentioned.
This part I'd love for you to walk through piece by piece, because there's an elaborate, I guess this is like in May, June when you're coming up with this 2014, but there's an elaborate potential theory that comes out of this. So let's walk through this.
So yeah, this is where it gets, this is where I need to tell you. You need to tell me where I'm getting too deep into the weeds, because it involves this. So this is what the BFO data is. You know that when a train is going towards you, the horn sounds like a higher pitch, and then when the train passes you, it's a lower pitch, right?
Yes.
When things move in relation to each other, that change of velocity changes the perceived wavelength or frequency of the thing, whether it's sound or light, okay? So imagine you're a geosynchronous satellite. You're 23,000 miles up looking down on the Indian Ocean, and you're looking at India, you're looking at Eastern Africa, you're looking at Southeast Asia, you're looking at Australia. And all of these people down there, there's like literally 1 billion customers probably, or not customers of Inmarsat, but people who are doing things with the radio wavelength. They've got cell phones, they've got garage door openers, they've got walkie-talkies. And you need to communicate with your customers amidst all of this noise. And so what you do is you're looking for a very narrow bandwidth. You've been assigned a little patch of the frequency. And you have to stick to that patch, or you're going to be in violation and they might take away your license, okay? So complicating that is the fact that some of your customers are on boats, that's no big deal. Some of them are on land, that's no big deal. The problematic ones are the ones that are flying around in airplanes, because these guys are going hundreds of miles an hour to and fro, and that they're causing significant changes in the frequency because of their motion relative to you. So how do you get rid of that? There's a thing called Doppler precompensation. What that means is that if I know that you're moving relative to you, I'm going to transmit at a lower or a higher frequency so that to compensate beforehand, so that when it gets to you. Okay, so you're expecting me, let's say our frequency is 100, right? And I'm flying towards you in such a way that what you get is you're going to get 102. The 100 is going to, because I'm flying towards you, that 100 is going to turn into 102 by the time you receive it.
Sure.
So what I'm going to do is, being very clever, I'm going to transmit it at 98.
Right.
And then when you get it, it's 100. So it looks perfect, right? So how can you do this? There's two ways. There's two different manufacturers of these boxes. One is called Rockwell, and they have a patent on the best way to do it, which is you transmit it to me at 100, and I'm picking it up at 102. So I just subtract 102, 100, 2. I'm going to transmit to you from 98,
Easy.
and you're going to get 100. Boom,
Got it.
done. Easy. But it's got a patent on it. So I'm working for a company called Thales, which gets bought by Honeywell. And they built a box, and they can't use that technique because it's under patent by their main rival. So they have to
the
come up
math is under patent, like just a mathematical.
No, the technique of subtracting your
but you can
income.
patent that.
I mean, listen, somebody could write and say, Jeff's wrong. The patent's not like that. That's my understanding.
Okay.
It may be wrong. The fact is that this is how Rockwell does it, whether it's because of patent or not. So this is how Thales does it. Thales takes information from the, it's called the IRS, the Inertial Reference System. It's basically a kind of fancy GPS.
Okay.
It knows where the plane is based on GPS and some other things. And it knows where the satellite is. And it knows where it is, and it knows how fast it's moving, and it calculates the relative speed, calculates the Doppler shift, and then transmits at that frequency. So it's a calculated value. And this is what Mike Exner told me that made me drop my sandwich, which was, if you can change the navigational data going into this box, you can change the frequency that it transmits at. So you could make the plane seem like it's going south when it's really going north.
That changes the game for you.
And so I'm like, wait a minute, because now like things start to make sense in a way that they hadn't before. Remember, we talked about how this box got turned back on and no one could explain why. They couldn't explain why would a captain who wanted to commit suicide turn the satellite box on and off again? And there were various theories that people came up with, but they seem pretty outlandish to me.
Is there a way that could have been an accident, though?
People have speculated on things like a fire or something, but when a fire happens on a plane, it's very catastrophic and deadly. It's one of the most dangerous things that can happen on a plane. And so you would either try to land it as quickly as possible, you'd issue a mayday, you try to get down, or the plane would just crash. It's possible. There's always like an X factor. Like maybe there's an explanation that we haven't had yet. When Air France 447 was found and they retrieved the black box, this was a mystery on par with MH370 at the time. Until they found the black box and they realized what happened, it was a kind of strange combination of events that nobody had predicted. Mm-hmm. It really was an unexpected turn of events. So there may be an explanation that is quite, that's true, that we just haven't thought of, or just is too, idiosyncratic for us to kind of imagine. But if this was somebody on the plane, we're imagining this kind of infinitely clever, attacker, it explains why this box was turned back on. Because they were essentially leaving a false trail of breadcrumbs to make it look like the plane was going south when it actually went north.
Is there a part of you, and mm-hmm. I got to challenge this just because, like in my line of work, for example, mm-hmm. the way I came up with this podcast was I had to edit crazy clips, right? And you sit here with the same, say, 60-second area. You listen to it 700 times, right. 1,000 times between the edit. You put a song with it. You put visuals with it. There's this suspension of reality that happens where you're so deep into it that you get to a point that when you have to do the audio master at the end, like if I do a 20, 25-hour edit, right. I'm not sure if I can hear the voice better over the song because I've heard the same thing said a million times right. versus if like it actually is correct. So I'll send out, I used to send out like a clip to Alessi or someone who hasn't edited it to that point right. to get their thought, and I'll explain where I'm going with this in a minute, to get their thoughts on, okay, how the first time you heard this, how well did you hear what's being said versus the music? Because I don't want the music to overtake what's being said. Meaning there's just this suspension that happens where you have to get a second eye on it because you're biased within that search. Right. So relating that to what you do, at this point, you've now been working on this case for months. You are knees deep in it. Mm. consuming what you do. This is like, of all the reporting you've ever done, this is probably the most wild case, at least in aviation, you would cover to that point. Is there a part of you that says like, okay, maybe Mike and I found this thing, but step back for a second. Am I now trying to fit the peg into this square peg into this square hole that we found to explain it versus, hey, we found a square hole, but we may not have a square peg, meaning like maybe the theory you end up coming up with, which is that someone from the jet goes down into that box and controls it. Maybe that's not what happened, but it would make sense if it did. I might be reaching, though, in doing that. Like I'm suspended in where reality is because I've been working so deeply on this case, you know, like Charlie and It's Always Sunny trying to solve it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Absolutely. So maybe one way of answering it is like, what was my confidence level that this is what happened? My confidence was extremely low. But what I was trying to do was to answer the question, are we 100% confident that this BFO data was generated in an innocent way? Meaning whoever, like, because you have to understand that if Zaharie Ahmad Shah took the plane, the captain had taken the plane in order to commit suicide, there's no way he could have known about BTO or BFO data. He
Why is
wouldn't
that?
even people in the because it's a very arcane thing within the world of satellite communications. Like you would have to work in satellite communications to know that these are parameters that are important in keeping up your network. It's like a part of network maintenance. It's very technical. It's very arcane. And the BTO data actually, we keep talking about Air France 447. They had only started recording BTO data within the previous year because they realized that it would have been useful potentially in an Air France 447 type of situation. So Air France 447 in a way like really inspired MH370 in some ways. So I was wondering, I was like, oh my God, there really is. Another thing that really struck me as uncanny was that there was a whole bunch of things that had to be true in order for any of this to be possible. Again, we talked about it had to be a Thales box, not a Rockwell box.
Yes.
It had to be a Boeing airplane, not an Airbus, because only Boeing has an accessible hatch to the electronics bay. It had to be a 777 and not any other kind of Boeing airplane because the 777 was the only fly-by-wire airplane. The 787 is also fly-by-wire, but it doesn't have an accessible hatch. It also required that Malaysian Airlines be subscribed to the lowest level.
And all these things line up.
And all of these, so if you take, and another one is that the two routes had to be north and south because the satellite wobble only discriminates between north and south. It doesn't discriminate from east and west. Also, to discriminate north and south, it would be helpful if it was on the equator. This plane disappeared very close to the equator.
Why would it? Oh, because of the positioning of the satellite.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
Got it.
Another thing is that you would want to have your mirror flight going over open ocean. Now remember, this plane was originally flying east. If you wanted to just stitch it into the ocean, you could fly east and go to the Marianas Trench. You'd never be found there. But instead it went back. Why did it go west? So all of these things lined up to make this scenario possible, which itself to me seemed uncanny, right? But did I know that it happened? Did I know it's even possible? I mean, I speculate that if you could get into this box, then you could make this false trail of breadcrumbs. But did I know that it was actually possible? I mean, I didn't know why it wasn't possible, but it was only a suspicion. And so what I did was I thought, okay, if it went north, where would it go? It would go basically over India, over Nepal, over the Himalayas, over far western China, into Tajikistan, into Kazakhstan, and it would have wound up in central Kazakhstan, a very underpopulated kind of place.
Landed with Borat.
It would, yeah. I mean, Borat is actually not really anything like, has nothing to do with like actual Kazakhstan. But yeah, I mean, more interestingly, it's where Russia's space program is. So Russia has, you know how we have Guantanamo Bay? It's like in this sort of hostile country, but it's like ours by treaty. They have a circle that's like 60 miles across in Kazakhstan.
Interesting.
That belongs to them because it's where they launch people into space. And they were launching Americans into space too, because our space shuttle blew up and we didn't have a replacement for it. So there happened to be a big runway in a very remote part of this base that like there's nobody lives near it or anything. And so you could, if you flew there and it would be like an hour before dawn, you could like refuel it and fly it off and you'd be good. So I said to myself, okay, so if this went to Kazakhstan, you've got a very short list of potential perpetrators because you would have to be, like we talked about, like infinitely sophisticated, like infinitely clever and crafty and ruthless. And you're winding up in Kazakhstan. So who like is allied with Kazakhstan? Kazakhstan is a client state of Russia.
Yeah.
So who's on the plane? Well, there was a Russian sitting about 12 feet from the hatch in first class. And there were 2 Ukrainian guys sitting under the satellite data unit.
Like
SATCOM.
friendly to Russia Ukrainian guys? Or,
So
you know, that's kind of
This was at a
an important
time-
distinction.
It is an important distinction, and it's confusing. I mean, it's something that I think a lot of Ukrainians have had to explain. A lot of people in Ukraine speak Russian as a primary language. A lot speak Ukrainian. The fact that you speak Russian does not mean that you love Putin. Doesn't mean that you're culturally any different from anybody else. But when this happened, you mentioned you were in Italy at the time, and that what people were obsessed with was
Crimea.
Putin's annexation of Crimea. Now, how did Putin do it? Now, Putin, it's important to realize, is a spook. He is a former KGB officer.
Right.
And he looks at the world through...
Yeah, you got me for a minute there. I was like, where's this going? How does he... So he does things in spooky ways, right? He was famous for... I mean, this is alleged, but I think it's widely believed that when he first came to power, he wanted to go to war with Chechnya. He did.
And so he blew up like...
Russia. I had David Satter in here, the guy who broke the story. He's been in here twice.
Before the KGB, there was the NKVD in the 30s that was responsible for murdering hundreds of thousands of people.
Like the pogroms and stuff?
No. Pogroms were ethnic, anti-Jewish for the most part. Riots.
Right.
No, this was the Great Terror during the 1930s that Stalin launched against real and imagined opponents in order to bring the country completely to its knees.
If you read David's books and look at the evidence he has, 100%.
Okay. So here's a guy who's not afraid to blow up or kill hundreds of citizens for the purpose of like whatever arcane purpose he feels like might be merited. He takes over Crimea not by rolling tanks over the border, but these guys show up, little green men. They're not wearing any insignia. They claim to be local separatists or something.
Not aliens, to be clear. You got to be careful in here, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But... yeah, I mean, but it's like that kind of like, we don't know what reality is. They are little green men. They are like from another dimension. We don't know who they are. They could be anybody. And this kind of like state of confusion and denial and crazy stories and theories and like people coming out of the woodwork. And so you don't know which way is up. And so these guys they speak Russian. They were Soviet Army veterans, which doesn't mean anything because everybody of that age group had to serve in the military.
Right.
But they're like kind of stocky looking guys and their family doesn't want to talk about them. And they were supposedly on this, but that's a whole nother thing. I think you're starting to understand like why I had to do an open-ended podcast about this mystery.
Oh, yeah.
Because it like you said, layer upon layer upon layer.
Yeah, I think I told you on the phone, I said, I don't know how many of these you're going to do, but this is hundreds of hours potentially. If you're really going to go through every nook and cranny and possibility. Yeah. I mean, the things we've been talking about today, and I apologize to people who wanted me to ask all these questions in the middle. I'd be cutting you off every 2 sentences if we went, there's some things I have asked to clarify on, but, that's why you're doing the podcast where you can bite size, for 30, 40 minutes, each one of these things individually. So today you're doing a good job with the overlay. Thank you.
So in June of 2014, 3 months into this mystery, I'm like, okay, who are these Russians? I just call them the Russians, even though 2 of them are Russian-speaking Ukrainians from Odessa. So what are they doing on the plane? I hire researchers, freelancers, one in Irkutsk, where the Russian in the first class is from, and I hire somebody to do some inquiries for me in Odessa, in Ukraine, where the the two furniture salesmen are from.
And who, like, when you say you hire someone, like some kid on the street looking for $10, or like an actual reporter?
I didn't know how to do it. I had never done it before. And so I have a friend at the New York Times, and I was like, can you recommend a good person in Irkutsk? And the Times, being who they are, have a very extensive network of fixers and freelancers and people who can.
And they got some
do this.
fixers in there, huh?
Yeah. So we need some fixing. And so this really fantastic person was working on it for me. And I was like, okay, we're going to figure out if the Russians are behind this. So these people were busy at work when I get a call in July 29th, 2014. Was it July 29th? It was somewhere in July, 17th maybe. Anyway, I got the date wrong already. I get a call. Can you come into CNN and talk about the Malaysian Airlines 777 that was shot down in Ukraine?
That's right.
And I was like,
different
I think you mean Malaysia. And they're like, no, this is a different one.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit.
That one they did do.
Because I'd been thinking like that maybe this whole thing is about Ukraine. Because so everyone was like, well, what's the point? Why would you steal a plane and take it to Kazakhstan? And there's, again, no good motives really. But the thing that one effect that this MH370 had was that people stopped talking, certainly in America, maybe not in Rome. But in the United States, people immediately stopped paying attention to Crimea and started talking about MH370. CNN talked about nothing else for like 2 months.
I believe that in America. I wasn't in America at the time.
But
yeah.
every time, and it wasn't out of nefariousness or whatever, but like the fact is that every time CNN tried to talk about anything else, their ratings cratered.
Oh, funny how that happens.
Funny how that works.
Yeah.
So people were legit obsessed with this. And it's all they wanted to talk about. And so it kind of made sense that there was a nexus between this spooky espionage leader of Russia and this sort of like difficult to parse and kind of nonsensical action that involved like killing a lot of civilians.
Do you think like immediately one of the major issues I'd have with him being involved with this kind of thing though is the fact that I don't remember the exact number, but a significant number of people on the jet were from China,
right?
Which is his next door neighbor who he's not trying to make enemies with. And I think there were only 3 Americans or something on this thing.
Yeah.
Like if you took this down, it's a potential China problem for him.
So listen, there's actually lots of problems with the what I call the spoof theory, the idea that somebody tampered with this data and the plane really went north.
Right.
There's actually a lot of problems with it. It's not a good theory in many regards, but it answers questions like, how come the plane isn't on the southern seabed? How come the SDA was turned back on? How come there was no floating debris found for the first year and a half? Things like this. And so I'm not trying to tell you that this is a perfect theory that doesn't have problems. And so, yeah, but the question is like, how can we explain the data that we have? And as time went by, when I first, so I waited some time. I worked on it. I floated it past some people. I was very not confident. Everybody was saying that the plane went to the southern Indian Ocean. There was no doubt that it went to the southern Indian Ocean. So I was the only person saying that. Now, there was a whole lot of other sort of stuff that was coming out of left field. That
Like
was
what?
like, there was a lot of sort of what they called the hero pilot theory, which is that the plane had caught fire, and it was the hero pilots were trying to save it, and then they succumbed, and so the plane flew south. There was people. I mean, if you watch the Netflix documentary, you have people like Florence to Changy who were saying that the Americans shot it down. There was
We'll come back to that. Yeah.
there was a lot of discussion about supposed eyewitness accounts, one of which was by some islanders in the Maldives who claimed that they saw this plane go overhead. And then a lot of people were like, it went to Diego Garcia, which is a U.S. British base. And so there was like all kind, but there was no evidence for any of these things. And so they were just kind of being thrown out there. And so this, I would consider this sort of part of the like sort of a fog of I mean, you could call it, let's just call it misinformation for the sake
Sure.
of ease. So I eventually came forward in early 2014, and I said, look, if you don't find this plane in the southern seabed, there is a possible explanation that I'm going to run past you. It may be, it's physically possible. I don't have evidence that this happened. I can't prove to you that this happened, but it seems to be that there is a physical possibility that you could do this thing that would make it seem like the plane went south when it really went north. This was widely dismissed as another conspiracy theory. It was like put on par with Diego Garcia, because we've been talking now for a while, right? A long time. Many light years more time than you can spend talking to Richard Quest on CNN, right? What I've been trying to tell you about Doppler precompensation is not something I can get across in a 2.5 minute hit on CNN.
Work.
So there's no way that I can say my idea and also justify it in a short clip. So basically, I'm going on and people are saying, so Jeff, you believe that the plane was stolen by Putin. And I'm like, whoa. No, don't.
Can we not start with that? I know that's good for ratings.
It's like I'm trying to say that like that the evidence is puzzling, and there may be an alternate explanation that we really need to consider. And so the disappointment for me isn't that people don't immediately believe this idea. The disappointment for me is that the officials have refused to even acknowledge that this observation has been made.
Is it also possible, though, because if it's provable that it could have gone either way, potentially, which I think you have pretty good evidence for that it's possible. Maybe the pilot, and I don't think the pilot was suicidal, I agree with you, but for the sake of argument, let's say for a minute he was.
Right.
Maybe you want to go sightseeing north as his last descent. You know what I mean? And then we never even looked there because the whole search went into the sea, and it went into some nondescript area. Maybe it wasn't even Kazakhstan. Maybe it was somewhere else, east or west or whatever. Crashed into a mountain. No one ever heard from it.
So
possible.
So basically, I said there's two possibilities. Either the BFO data is innocent, and it was generated as a result of things that people did who didn't know how the BFO worked, or it was tampered with, which requires such a level of sophistication that it would have to be a state-level actor, because you would have to understand not only how to fly a plane, not only how air traffic control works, how satellite communications work, but essentially you have to have a sophisticated electronic warfare capability, because what you're doing is something that is very arcane in any corner of the world except for electronic warfare, which we can talk about later or more or now if you want. But it's a mindset that a pilot would certainly not have. It requires very specific skills and very specific outlook.
Can you explain? I mean, you're using the word warfare,
right?
So we do got to dig into that a little bit. What's the connotation there?
So there's an entire field of the defense industry called electronic warfare, and it started with the development of radar during World War II. And so radar is a way that you can see where your enemy's aircraft are. They can see yours, and so you get once you develop detection measures, you have to develop countermeasures, or it behooves you to develop countermeasures. One of the earliest one was they would fly these giant bomber formations. The British would do it at night, and they would just dispense chaff, like little fluttering pieces of tinfoil, like they throw in at New Year's in Times Square. What's that stuff called? Confetti.
Yeah.
It's like metal confetti, and you strew this, and because so when you beam your radar waves at this cloud of confetti, it can't see. It's like a shroud, right?
Yes.
And so as the decades go by, there's all kinds of crazy things that you can do. And one I think that's worth talking about, it's pretty cool, which is, so you're sending out your radar, and we talked about Doppler before, right? So if you're flying towards me, and I shine to use this example of 100, I'm sending my thing out at a frequency of 100. It's hitting you, you're coming towards me fast, so it's coming back to me at 110. Right?
Yes.
And so what I can do is, I don't want to see birds. I don't want to see clouds. I'm only worried about invading fighter jets. Okay. So I have a thing called a a gate, a Doppler gate. And basically, I'm not going to look at anything that's under 105.
It's like a noise gate. It's the same
noise
concept.
gate. Exactly. And so you're flying at me at 110. You're flying at me. It's bounding about 110. I see it. You're the only thing that I see because you're the only one who's moving fast. You stand out like a sore thumb, right? Okay, now your guys on the other side know that I'm doing this Doppler gating. And you're like, how do we avoid this? And we were talking about Doppler precompensation before. You do a version of that. You say, okay, I'm going to measure what your radar is sending out, and I'm going to blip you back at like a really strong, like 100. I'm going to precompensate. So you think I'm not shining at 110, I'm shining at 100, and I get like out of the gate, something like that. And so this kind of Doppler spoofing is basically something that's been going on since the 50s. There was a famous case during the Cuban Missile Crisis where the Cubans were, expecting to be invaded by the Americans. And the Americans sent up these balloons, I think out of a submarine or something. And the balloons were transmitting this Doppler shifted radar frequencies. So the Cubans were like, oh my God, there's like a whole squadron of American planes coming in. And this is in the 50s. So fast forward now 60 years. And this is like, so when I talk about Doppler precompensation to 99.99% of humanity, they're like, that is the craziest, most arcane thing I've ever heard.
Around.
But if you work in the electronic warfare business, you're like, yeah, Doppler spoofing.
Forever.
That's what we do. We wake up and we have Wheaties and Doppler precompensation.
Real quick, I just got to go to the bathroom. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. So just staying on this whole electrical hatch. What's the official term again? Electrical?
It's called the EE bay, E/E.
Bay.
It's probably simpler to call it just the electronics bay.
Got it. So the way that you had laid it out was that, and I'll have you kind of explain the whole thing, but this Russian who was 12 feet away from the bay could have gone in there and effectively could have, through certain measures, had the ability to take control of the cockpit and therefore the plane. In the documentary, you were telling me this off camera, in the documentary and also publicly, guys like Mike Exner were refuting that and saying there's no way this could have happened.
Right.
You're not saying it did happen. You're saying we need to look at the possibility, and you think it hasn't been proven to you that you couldn't do this definitively. Am I saying that correctly?
I think the question that search officials have to address is there any possible way that this data could have arisen from a different way? Is there a non-innocent way? And they've never even addressed it. And so I guess the drum I guess I've been beating is, okay, listen, I understand why you think it went south. I think it's important that the public understand why you think it went south. But I think it's also important to interrogate whether it's possible that there's another explanation. And essentially, I would say that I raised the possibility that the seabed search might fail at a time when no other person
was willing to do that,
was even could entertain the possibility. And I was kind of ridiculed at the time. But I thought, well, I'm going to get my satisfaction when they search the seabed and it's not there, because people will say, well, we didn't find it. What about that guy back in early 2015 who said that it might not be there? Surely they'll be knocking down my door.
Yeah.
Which that's not what happened, actually, because people were like, well, we're sure it's there. We just didn't find it. So that's another area that I was wrong about.
But as far as going down there, what would that take? You laid out some of this in the documentary, but what would guy goes down into the bay? What happens next?
Okay, so you have a particular model of plane where there's a hatch that you can pull back a carpet, pull the lever and go down, and now you have access to the computers that control the flight surfaces of the plane. And there's a kind of principle in cybersecurity that if you have possession of a machine, you can, in principle, get that machine to do anything that it's physically capable of. You have it, you own it, it's in your possession. You can do what you can make it dance to your tune. And
is there like a computer system down there with a keyboard, or is it all electrical like boxes?
There is a system called, I believe, PMAT, which is a keyboard that you plug in. It's not to take over the plane. It's so that usually ground personnel, maintenance people can get in and check the status of various things. You can upload software into it. Some of these things can only be done when the plane is on the ground with weight on wheels, it's called. So, could you spoof a weight on wheels signal? I don't know. I don't really know how any of this would work in detail. But what I'm saying is, if you imagine somebody who is incredibly sophisticated and they own your box, then I think you should have less than 100% confidence that they aren't going to make it do what they want. There's, I'm sure some of your viewers and listeners, are familiar with cryptocurrency. There's this idea that, like, if you have the key to this Bitcoin amount, you should not store it online.
Not your keys, not your crypto. Yeah.
Right? Not your keys, not your crypto. And so if I have it stored on my phone and I hand it to you, and you're an Israeli cybersecurity firm, do I still own this Bitcoins? Maybe not.
Yeah.
So it's a principle in crypto security that if you want to really be certain, you write it down like in paper, pen and ink on paper.
Yes.
And you put it like in a safe, in a locked safe, and you don't tell it to your wife/girlfriend or anybody. So we're positing that this in this particular, uniquely, this model of plane, you can go down and be physically present with this computer. I don't know how so people have definitely said this is impossible. A well-known aviation writer named William Langewiesche wrote an article for The Atlantic in which he said that this is impossible for so many reasons that I can't get into it. I was like, just give me one. So yeah, it's a completely unresolved issue. I can neither give you a specific mechanism by which it can be done, nor can anyone give me a specific reason why it can't be done. You're just having people making assertions.
Understood. So when you were looking at this and then taking it to the next level with Russia's involvement, your idea, to bring it full circle, was that because there was so much heat on Putin at the time due to the whole Crimea thing, everyone paying attention to that something like this would have provided an extremely welcome distraction for that story to kind of die off a little bit. Is that fair to say?
I would in response to that question, which is a question I got a lot. In fact, I would say it was the number one question that everyone always asked anytime I started talking about Russian and spoofing, right, is that I'm trying to explain what might have happened to the plane. Like, what was like why Putin wanted to do it, or what he would have benefited from it, or whether it would have been a good decision or a bad decision. I'm just trying to say, is it physically possible? Should we entertain the possibility that this happened? I'm not trying. My job is not to make it seem like an attractive prospect that every right-minded citizen should go do as immediately as possible. What I'm saying is it conceivable that this could happen? Is it physically possible? And then, sure, let's match up. Does it match up with something that Vladimir Putin would do? Well, in 2014, there was a country that was known to destroy Malaysian Airlines 777s. This was Russia.
Yeah.
So I sometimes like to tell the analogy of, imagine you're a chicken farmer, right? And you've had a chicken farm for many years and you've never lost a single chicken. And then one day you wake up and there's a bloody, mangled chicken carcass on your front yard. Okay, and you don't have no idea who did it. Absolutely none whatsoever. And then 4 months later, you find a fox jumping over a fence with a chicken in its mouth. Right?
There you go.
You don't know who killed your first chicken, but somewhere on your list of suspects, there has to be a fox, right?
And it's not like you really have a list of suspects outside of that, because we're talking about one other plane that we know they shot down.
Right.
Now, as a little bit of a challenge point there, the context was different. I mean, it was obviously horrible what they did to it, and they never admitted to it, the one that they shot down over Ukraine.
Right.
But it was allegedly shot down in what was viewed as an ongoing, I guess, like small war between the two countries going on, and I guess they might have thought it was some sort of military jet and then shot it down. It was commercial, whereas the one that we're talking about is in a neutral area of the world away from there, not involving necessarily outside the three passengers, Russians and Ukrainians. It's all a bunch of other people.
There are many differences between the case. However, it is an uncanny coincidence that these two planes went down 4.5 months apart. They were both Malaysian Airlines 777s, of which there were only 16 in the world out of 20-some thousand
Really?
commercial aircraft. Yes. And so...
There's only 16 777s in the world?
Well, after MH17, there were 14, because 2 were destroyed in the span of these. So
I didn't know that.
It was an extremely unlikely event. And also, it was initially, it was really quite striking to me that when MH17 was shot down, there was I'm going to say retired in quotation marks, GRU, Russian military intelligence officer named Igor Girkin, who said, "Oh, we shot down. Hey, hooray for us! We shot down a military plane belonging to those dastardly Ukrainians.
Whoops!
So hooray for us!" And then it was discovered, oh, it wasn't a Ukrainian military plane. It was a Malaysian civilian plane. So everyone's like, "Oh, look, they gave themselves away." Well, listen, Girkin is a Russian military intelligence, right? We talked about Putin himself is a spy. Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about you're talking about people who's wake up every morning. Again, they have their Wheaties and they commit mindfuckery. Right.
Yes.
That's what they do. And so you're going to take this guy's you're going to take his explanation like face value. This plane. So everyone thinks that
this guy right here on the screen.
That's the man.
Got it.
He's in jail right now, not in Netherlands, where he was convicted of mass murder for killing all the people aboard MH17, but in Russia because he criticized Vladimir Putin.
Ooh, that's a big no-no there.
It's tough. It's tough to be a hustler.
You were doing so well shooting down planes. Now you're going to prison.
So Russian military intelligence becomes a very interesting suspect. These are people who, the little green men, the use of intelligence for military purposes to try to achieve your goals. It's going to be a busy couple of years for the GRU because they're going to get up to all kinds of hijinks, which we can talk about. Some of them are very relevant to America.
Can you talk about those?
Sure.
No.
But before I do, let me just put a cap on this MH17 business. Initially, it was accepted by all right-thinking people that this was a mistake, that the Russians had taken this piece of equipment that didn't have a full radar, and it wasn't able to identify its targets. And so when they shot kind of mistakenly at something that they thought was something, and it was something else, and it was all terrible, but it was let's call it an honest mistake. Well, one of the really fascinating things about this case is that technology is so important, and technology is changing, and new things are happening, and new innovations are being developed as it's unfolding. And it changes the nature of the game. And what happened was an unemployed guy in the UK named Elliot Higgins is sitting in his underwear on his sofa watching coverage of Syria. And there's some suspicion that the Assad regime is poisoning its own people with gas, right? And so he develops this thing called open source intelligence, and he's sifting through stuff that people put online to try to gather and try to piece together what's happening. Fast forward to MH17 getting shot down, and his team of volunteers from around the world, much like the IG that we were talking about earlier, people are kind of pitching in and lending their expertise and saying, okay, we're going to look at dash cams and other information that people are putting forward, and we're going to be able to match the movements of this rocket launcher as it moves across the eastern part of Ukraine. It's been sent in. They're able to identify the military unit that belongs to. They're able to identify under whose command it was operating. So this is not a militia that had managed to capture a piece of equipment that they didn't understand how to use. This was a regular Russian military unit operating under the command of GRU, the military intelligence. And so they drive this thing into a field. They sit under a busy international air route, and they're watching plane after plane after plane after plane go by for several hours, and then they pick MH17 out of the sky and shoot it down. They're later convicted. The people in charge of this operation are later convicted in absentia in
The Hague.
the Netherlands. Yeah. So was it accidental? I mean, some people still, even in Bellingcat, say that it was a mistake. But the thing that I push back against that is a modern military air defense system isn't just a rocket launcher with a radar next to it. It's a distributed system in which all of the sensors are interconnected and all of the rockets and other assets are also interconnected. So it's a distributed system. And just because this thing was in a field dozens or hundreds of miles away from whoever was in charge of it, one of the main things you learn when you study to be a anti-aircraft missile operator, especially one that can reach 70,000 feet, is you do not fire it unless your officer tells you to do it. Right? So I have a red button in front of me. I don't just push that red button ever, unless the lieutenant, who's my boss, tells me, and the lieutenant doesn't tell me to do it unless his boss tells him.
Yes.
So there's like multiple levels up, because obviously we have the Vincennes case in the United States, where a U.S. naval ship shot down an Iranian airliner during a time of heightened tension in the Gulf.
When was that? Roughly. Do we have it?
90s, I want to say.
Vincennes, Iran Air Flight 655, is that it?
That's it.
1988.
Whoa, I
88,
don't know
okay.
about this. Okay, so what happened here?
Well, this is an example of, if you're a little careless with your anti-aircraft missiles, it's easy to shoot down a civilian airliner. There was more recently, actually a Ukrainian plane was shot down was that in Iran as well? Boy, the brain holes are opening up. This is what you want to avoid. So this was in the Persian Gulf. There was tensions between the United States and Iran, and an Iranian passenger flight flew off, and it flew towards a U.S. naval ship, which misunderstood it to be an attacking Iranian plane.
So they shot it down.
So basically the claim about MH17 was that it was a similar kind of scenario where they just mistook the plane. The difference between MH17 and this is that, there really was like a shooting war about to erupt. Obviously there was a shooting war in Ukraine, but that's a long story.
Right.
But this really was flying right at, it was uniquely flying at this plane, whereas MH17 was one of many, many planes that were flying innocently along this route.
But to go specifically to what you were saying there, chances are they would have had to deliberately pick this out, and it wasn't an accident. Are there any? I know less about MH17 with the case on the ground. Are there any decently evidence-backed theories as to people who were on that plane, or some sort of backwards-ass logic behind why Russia would have wanted to purposely shoot it down?
Well, it's difficult to. It's so now we're getting into like this sort of hybrid warfare talk. We're talking about making moves, and you're not really clear why you're doing it. I mean, was the uncanny echo between MH17 and MH370 intentional? I mean, were they trying to send a signal? If MH370 was the most sophisticated attack imaginable, MH17 was like hitting someone's skull with a sledgehammer.
Right. Yeah. Straightforward.
Which again is something that Russians have been known to do. But so it's again, it's not probative, but it's just one of these weird things. Like, is there a link between these two incidents that happened so closely together and were so unlikely? But what you have in the wake of MH17 also is, on the one hand, a whole bunch of Russian skullduggery, where Russians are doing these. They seem to have launched a kind of multi-front war against the West. And in the context of this, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but basically Putin was consolidating his hold on Russia, and he was trying to promote a vision of himself as this kind of czar who could make the empire great again. And he felt it was an existential threat to him for Ukraine, which had been under the rule of a Putin ally, to go into a pro-Western democracy, which had just happened in sort of late 2013, early 2014.
Yes, with Maidan and all that.
The Maidan, right. Color revolutions and all this. So he felt like a red line had been crossed, that the West was impinging on what they call the near abroad. It's a bit like the Monroe Doctrine in the United States in the early 19th century. It's like, you cannot, this is our area, you can't act in this area.
He's concerned they're going to join NATO and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And also just provide a model for how to live. I mean, he wanted, I was talking to a friend of mine who's kind of an expert in this area, and he was saying that that Putin's worst nightmare is for Russians to look out the window at their next door neighbor and see that things are better over there where there's liberal democracy. So he wants liberal democracy to fail. And so you have Russian involvement in things like they're assassinating dissidents.
Yes.
There's a really interesting documentary that was made about the doping scandal.
Oh, yeah, the Icarus one?
Icarus.
Oh, my God. It's one of the best documentaries ever made.
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating because the parallel the relevance that struck me was that all of the experts thought that these urine collection vials were untamperable. They were made in Switzerland by the experts, and you cannot tamper with them. And the only reason that it's emerged is because this guy basically came forward and said, yeah, I ran the program and we did it. And I'm going to tell you exactly how we did it. And I watched that documentary and I'm like, damn, I wish somebody would come forward like that.
Oh my God. How perfect was that? That fell in that dude's lap and Brian Fogel's lap when that guy came in.
Right.
It's like, that's one of those documentaries where the universe just wanted it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
And it makes some of us envious that he had that stroke of luck because, but the lesson is, you think you're so much smarter than the most dangerous belief that you can hold is that you are much smarter than your adversary, and your adversary could never outwit you. And that we talked about measures and countermeasures. To believe that your enemy can't provide a countermeasure to you is foolish, very, very dangerous. And so, the GRU gets involved in tampering with Brexit. They got the Fancy Bear hack. They took the DNC servers. GRU, same people.
Yeah, I had Andy Greenberg in here to talk about that. He wrote the book Sandworm, which goes through.
He turns around, goes into the master bedroom and finds that Kaz's laptop is there and still open and alive, logged into Alpha Bay. Kaz is arrested. He's taken to Thai jail, essentially. He agrees to extradition, and then a week after his arrest, he's found dead in his jail cell.
Alleged suicide.
Right, yeah. So
GRU team 77455 or 445, one of them. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy. And, that's the world we're living in though now too, where you can electronically create chaos around the world from a little office somewhere.
I have an article that ran on January 2nd, I think, in New York Magazine about electronic warfare against civil aviation. And now there's multiple areas in the world right now where there is spoofing going on, where GPS signals are being tampered with. And the result is that these civilian airliners are going off track. Their sort of navigational systems hacking is too strong of a word, but basically these signals are being altered. In many cases, it's part of air defense. It's like a defense against drones. In other cases, we might not know exactly what the purpose of this is, but but electronic warfare is now in the realm of civilian aviation.
Yeah, my friend Sean Ryan, when I had him on the podcast.
When you're in Baghdad in that time period, you could just hear the car bombs going off all day, all night, hear the gunshots, hear the gunfights, and it was just bombs, terrorists, suicide bombers, all the time. People coming back all f***ed up, seeing these vehicles getting blown up, seeing what's left of them, if anything. I mean, it was... This guy died, this guy died, this guy died, this guy died, and that's why we were so busy. We were killing these guys that were making the bombs, we were killing the guys that were planting the bombs, we were killing the guys that were detonating the bombs, and it was saving American lives.
He talks he talks a lot about something that's also a passion of mine, which is the scare of the power grids.
Right.
And how vulnerable that is. One of the things Andy Greenberg had talked about in Sandworm that scared the shit out of me, that I've been talking about on this podcast now for 3 years, is Russia was running in 2014, 2015, like December 2015 especially. They were running basically like dummy hack attacks just to like test what they could do.
Right.
And they were shutting down for hours at a time
Right.
the Kiev power system.
Right.
And it's like, dude, if you have governments around the world who could hack in and create a mass outage on a power grid, do you know? I mean, the damage that could cause is monumental.
Well, I think if you talk to cybersecurity experts, and you clearly do a lot, we're all doing it. I mean,
Yes.
I'm sure the United States is doing it as well.
Absolutely.
China recently, according to the Washington Post, was hacking into systems in, I think it was a power grid in Hawaii or something. This kind of stuff goes on a lot. And the goal isn't necessarily to take down the power. I mean, China isn't our adversary right now. They could be. I mean, and you know the way these countries, the intelligence services work. It's like England is our best friend, but do you think we don't spy on them too?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. There's no such thing as friends with espionage.
Right. And so, listen, civil aviation is infrastructure. It's a form of transportation. It's that's the one. Water utility, sure.
In China, we have the article that you were just talking to on the screen.
Texas. Oh my gosh.
Okay. Interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, but so if you're in an environment in which it's a multilateral world where many people have this kind of espionage, hacking capability, and they're always looking to have potential leverage on each other, aviation is a part of that. Aviation is infrastructure. And there's an important point I think I want to make. Historically, civilian transport is sacred to a certain extent. Like, you know, when the Lusitania was sunk, that really drove us into World War I because you can't sink civilian ships. And similarly, you know, whatever's going on the ground, it's been kind of accepted that aviation is like a separate world and it doesn't get touched. This is why MH17 caused so much surprise, because even though it was flying over a war zone, they thought, well, the war's on the ground and we're in the air. There have been multiple incidents where the sacrosanctity of aviation has been breached, I would say. And one of them was an incident, and this is another one maybe you could call. Oh, that's the article I was talking about. Air travel is not ready for electronic warfare.
This is the one you wrote in January.
And I don't mention it in this article, but clearly what I'm thinking is, was MH370 the first example of what we now know to be a trend of countries using the techniques and technologies of electronic warfare against civilian aviation? Again, it's no longer as sacrosanct as it once was.
Sure.
You have, and I can't cite you chapter and verse on this, maybe you can pull it up, but there was a case where a Belarusian dissident was pulled off a Ryanair flight that was flying over Belarus. It wasn't going to or from Belarus, but they basically said, you have to land. And the pilot was like, I don't want to land. And they sent up a fighter. Yeah, so this plane was flying innocently in international airspace, and they forced it down and pulled the dissident off, and he's still in jail.
Belarus forced it down. Oh, whoa.
So Belarus is obviously a close client state of Russia.
Yeah.
And then another example.
That guy's Poroshenko?
Ramen.
Did I make that up?
Right. No, I think you're right.
The president?
Right.
You know.
But so then another example I would give is the shoot down of Prigozhin's plane. Prigozhin was obviously somebody who had gotten on Putin's wrong side.
Yeah.
And as with Igor Girkin, you don't necessarily want to be on Putin's wrong side.
That guy looked just like Mike Ehrmantraut from what's it called, Breaking Bad.
Right.
Every time I saw Prigozhin, I thought like Mike was gonna be like, "Here we go again."
Well, so everyone's like, Prigozhin reached a deal with Putin. So he tried to stage a coup d'etat.
Yes, that was what, June? Is that right? May, June?
I have no idea. It's
2023. Whatever, it was last year.
But you know, if you would strike at the king, you better kill him. And
come at the king, you best not miss.
That's right. So Prigozhin's plane gets shot down, or had a very unfortunate mechanical accident.
Yes, unfortunate.
So much unfortunate. So again, we've seen this again and again, where this thing that was unthinkable in March of 2014 is becoming less unthinkable.
Yes. Now, when you see something like that, though, at least, you know, Prigozhin's plane going down, he's an active military type because he ran a mercenary group within a country actively at war. And I mean, it's Russia too. Like you said, all bets are off. But your point is taken that we do have with our interconnected world, we have some very blurred lines about what types of, I don't want to say things are on the table, but what types of things countries may be capable of that shouldn't be on the table. I mean, that one about Belarus pulling a plane onto the ground and yanking a guy. That is, and that's not even shooting down a plane and killing people.
Right.
That's interesting, though.
They had no business tampering with that plane.
Yeah.
So to give you some context, when it was June of 2014 and I was starting to think about this stuff, I didn't know that this was right. But what terrified me was the possibility that it was right. Because if MH370 was this like almost inconceivably sophisticated attack, it raised the question of like what was next, like what would come next. And all the things that I was most afraid of happened.
Like what?
Well, the Fancy Bear attack being the worst. I mean, basically you have the United States media reporting that Hillary Clinton's emails, yada, yada, yada. So the entire 2016 election gets to be about all this stuff that was basically put there by the GRU. Mm. And we are dealt with the consequences of that. And now to this day, I mean, Russia is still pulling all of these hijinks. There's like, then they invaded, then they did a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the horrors, the hundreds of thousands of people dead. We are in a death match for democracy versus totalitarianism. And these guys are absolutely ruthless, and I think smarter, apparently, than us, because I feel like they are carrying out these things in a way that we seem unable to prepare ourselves for.
Not to underestimate them. I do try to be careful with that. But like, you know, Ukraine is, unfortunately, you talk to everyone on the ground, they're not really in a position to win this war. That said, we would have thought Russia would bowl over Ukraine and be in Odessa in like 2 days.
Everyone thought it was going to be a 3-day war.
Right. And they have not, like, to the credit of the Ukrainians on the ground, they have not done that. Like, and not to discredit Ukraine as a country, but like, y'all can't even beat Ukraine. There's a part of me that goes, okay, maybe they're not, like, I know who Putin is as a person. I know who those oligarchs are as people. It's not an argument of like, oh, maybe they're not that bad. They're bad. But like, maybe a country with the GDP of Italy isn't such the problem that I once thought it was. I mean, I thought, in all fairness, like, this is something, I was one of these people for years kind of like, oh my God, we got to look at this Russia thing, and no one would listen. And now everyone's listening about it. And now I'm kind of like, yeah, they're a problem. But also, who's going to replace him? Like, I feel like they're going to be as bad as he is, you know? I
mean, I don't disagree with you, but I sort of feel like if you were in sort of the summer of 1944 saying like, all right, everyone talks about how bad Hitler is, but like, look, and come on, the Soviets are pushing in from the east. We've got most of France by now. It's like, come on.
Their GDP was huge, though. They were taking so many. That's the other problem with, because David Satter says the same thing, and I fully hear him, because like David Satter's life has been dedicated to this. Putin has killed his friends. I love David. He's a very good friend of mine. But like at the same time, like Hitler was taking the whole the Sudetenland. He had Poland within his reach. He was going to be going west. Like his GDP, they were humming now, coming out of the Great Depression, if you will. Early years there that affected everyone around the world. Like there was a real economic impact there. Whereas when I look at the situation now, and I certainly have like a lot of questions about China and how much of that might even be overdone. Like China's GDP is more concerning, because I think the numbers from like 2020 were like 19 to 17 trillion, like US, China. Whereas, Russia's farther down the list. Again, don't want to discredit or discount a problem. We see Russia killing people on British soil with polonium. I mean, they're very, very reckless.
All of this hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
When I started worrying about the possibility of a Russian attack.
Yes.
So the things that kept me awake at night, my worst fears came true. Is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Now, maybe it could have been worse. Okay, maybe it could have been worse, but. The thing is, it's just that. Well, I think you get what I'm saying.
I do.
It was. It's worrying because it has not been always fun or easy, because I have been widely ridiculed and like made fun of, and like you've had your experience with like angry commentators and everything. It's like it's not always fun being in the public space talking about ideas that are not widely accepted. And
I appreciate that you do it, and you walk right into it. You say what you say. You lay out your case. You're very matter of fact about that. I admire that a lot.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate you reciprocating and like having me on to talk about this. I mean, I guess I did kind of ridicule my theory on your show, and I reached out. And I said, listen, it's like let's talk about it, and now we're talking about it, and that's great, because that's what I want to do. I want to like engage. I want to talk about this case, but I also want to talk about how do we talk about this case? How do we engage? You had this guest on. He had this theory. It was pretty bonkers. He was very confident, and that is not ultimately how you fix a broken watch.
Correct.
You've got to be like you've got to have all the pieces lined up on your towel, and we have to go through and talk about it. Now, am I sure that the spoof theory is correct? No. Is it possible that the pilot took it and went south? Yes. But we need to. I think that there's my mission here is not to convince people that this is what happened to the plane. Although I think it is an interesting story in itself, and I'm a journalist. I like interesting stories, and like the twists and turns in this case are like pretty.
Yeah, you got that made for you on this one.
Right? Yeah. It was made to be entertaining. I think it was literally made to be entertaining. Like shoes kept dropping. It was like a serial where there's twists and turns and cliffhangers and all that. But I think it's important. We live in this age in the last 10 years, and YouTube is a big part of it, frankly, where everybody can say anything. And how do you sift the wheat from the chaff? How do you separate the noise from the signal?
It's hard.
And I'm here kind of to sit at your knee and learn, because I do think that, like, we've been talking for, I don't know, maybe a couple hours or something.
A couple hours, yeah, something like that.
And we've kind of just scratched the surface, but we've already told much more information than they were able to get across in the Netflix documentary.
Yes.
Now, if you said to me before I was involved in that project, if you have 3 hours to talk about MH370, can you get the gist of it across? I would say, yeah. I think I can. But then once you start to actually lay out all those pieces on the towel.
Yeah, there were so many different narratives in there.
So many different narratives and parts. Well, they also spent a lot of time beautifully, I think, it's sort of invoking the grief of the family members. But then they also spent an entire episode talking about Florence to Changy, who I think is just a case study in how not to talk about this case.
Can we actually, if we're on it, can we go to that right now?
Yeah.
So she came up when Ashton was in here too. What was he was saying? He talked to her or something. I don't even remember.
The French lady.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he was. What was he saying, Alessi?
I think he said something in regards to he'd reached out to her and he said that it was shot down. And then we were going back and forth, being like, "Oh, your theory, it doesn't make sense because," or she
was denying.
She was denying it.
Yes.
He was saying, "Oh, he completely denied it." And then we were like, "Wait a minute! All the articles are saying that this is what she said.
Right, and she said it herself on the documentary, which could be taken out of context.
Yeah.
But then she wrote a whole book on it.
Exactly.
Wait, she's denying that she said the plane was shot down?
Yeah, so she was, and this is, because again, you can be taken out of context on cameras. I know, that's why we film this like
Right.
so direct so that people don't ever have that happen, and we talk for 3 hours, so it's like you get it out there.
Right.
But like when people are editing a documentary or something, I mean, you can do a lot with words. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you saw
Yeah.
that from some of your own cuts.
I've been on both ends of that.
So when she says something like that, I hear it. And then she writes a, 400-page book laying out this theory and then saying, oh, I never did that. Yeah, are my red alarms going off? Yes, they are. And they weren't for Ashton, so we had a disagreement there. But she laid out the theory on the documentary, but can you at least like run through that again just so people who aren't familiar with the documentary will understand what she was trying to say?
I confess I have not read her book, so my knowledge of her specifics is limited. The long and short is that she thinks that the Americans shot it down over the South China Sea, and that everything that happened after that was like made up. If you have a theory, you want to have, on the one hand, positive evidence supporting it, and you want to have an absence of negative evidence making it, ruling it out.
How did she get the AWACS like as a piece of evidence?
So I've heard people claim that there was some kind of U.S. military exercise going on.
Yes.
Nobody's really. I mean, if it was my theory, I would like try to get people on the ships to talk to me about it, or at least pin down that, like, I don't know, the deployment of naval ships can't be that secret. I mean, it's a massive thing with hundreds of people on board. It's like I haven't had to do it, so, but there was, as far as I can see, no attempt to kind of validate her claims. I mean, based on the Netflix documentary, it seems like a major piece of evidence is somebody that she can't name told her in a parking garage.
Yeah, it's always tough these days with anonymous sources.
Yeah. So she doesn't really have any compelling evidence for, and she has a lot of compelling evidence against, namely all of the Inmarsat data, all of the debris that washed up in the Indian Ocean, which we haven't even talked about.
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Okay. But I don't know why they put her in this show. It doesn't, I mean, I know why they put her in the show. They wanted to make it seem like there's a lot of possibilities. And I think that's an instinct that a lot of people in the mainstream media have. And it's a bad instinct because it's not correct. There's not that many things that could have happened to this plane.
Really? Like not that many?
Like what else?
I guess it is like kind of, you start getting to a little bit fairy tale land.
You
when
can,
you start, yeah.
I mean, even to say like, okay, I can describe like some of the species of things that come across over my transom.
I think you said this at the beginning, by the way, but you're a pilot too, right?
Yeah, I fly light aircraft,
Okay.
and gliders.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are like, well, there was some employees of this outfit called Freescale Semi-Conductor.
Yeah, this one has a lot of holes in it.
Well, it's not that it has holes so much as like it's not a theory. It's like you're sort of positing a motive, but a motive like untethered to any mechanism is not a theory. It's just an idea. There's also, you can also have a whole genre of theories that are like, I don't like Americans. I don't like Chinese people. I don't like Russians. I actually do like Russians. I just don't like Putin. People get very excited about ideas that aren't actually theories. They're just ideas. You have people say, well, there's these, and I'll say something. I had read a lot about and talked to people about a lot of aircraft accidents. Like, I know what a normal aircraft accident is. And one of the sort of principles, like broad principles of aircraft accident investigation is that eyewitnesses are pretty useless. Like the average person was like, I have an eyewitness testifying. In practice, if someone says, oh, I saw this plane fly overhead and it had 2 engines, it probably had 1 engine or something. They're just notoriously unreliable.
Yeah.
And so if someone says, oh, and then there's a lot, oh, this woman saw this plane glowing as it flew overhead.
Oh, dude. You know what is just ringing in my head from that podcast, which obviously got a lot of tread online, but like, I swear to God, because I live right here next to
Right.
New York City.
Right.
I now can't not fucking look at a plane every time it goes over and be like, well, can't see the cockpit. I wonder how far away that is. Oh, that's 1,000 feet. Can't see in it. Last night I'm walking along Sinatra Drive and I'm like looking up at planes. I'm like, nope,
Yeah.
can't see it.
Yeah.
It just has ruined me looking at
Yeah.
planes now forever
Yeah.
because these people are making claims that are just like, just think of human capability. It's patently not possible.
Well, how many times do you even notice that I mean, now that you do, but it's like planes fly overhead a lot. So people are like, yeah, I was walking down the street and this this Malaysian Airlines 777 flew overhead. You're like, really?
It was 300 miles away. Saw it right there.
So there's that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, I forgot what we were.
Yeah, so we
talking about.
were talking about like some of the, we start with Florence to Changy and some of the theories that are pointed out. You've explained well now at least the angle you were coming at it, which is, well, you can't prove me wrong on something like this, or you can't prove that this is impossible, that this could have happened, so let's introduce the possibility. Do you see, though, how some of these other people, including Florence to Changy, could make the same kind of argument, though, for their quote-unquote claims?
So we've been sitting here for however many hours, right? And I've been sort of walking you through the detail and evidence. How do you open the hatch? How do you how does Doppler precompensation work? She can't talk about anything in detail because her ideas are just vague. So like if I was Florence to Changy and I came on your show, I'd be like, this ship was there, this ship was there, this ship was there, this ship was there, this guy was on it, this guy was doing this, a plane took off at such and such a time, it was loaded with this missile, when they came back to port they only had 4, but they set off with 5. You know what I'm saying? It's like we could be able to do what Bellingcat did with MH17 with the United States Navy and MH370.
Got it.
She doesn't have detail because if you really hunger for a story, like if you're a historian and you're totally obsessed with like the 2009 Lakers or whatever, right? You would know exactly who was on the roster, every game that they played, what kind of shoe they were wearing, and it's there. You can dig it out, and you go down the rabbit hole.
Yes.
If you have a super vague theory that you just don't really want to interrogate too closely because there's nothing there, that's when you get really vague claims. And so,
fun to think about, though.
What's fun to think about?
Sometimes it's fun to think about like how advanced some military stuff could be, or things we don't know about. You know, and you got to be careful with that because that's a problem. It's fun. It's like
I think it's fun. I mean, I to a certain extent, it is satisfying to like say, well, I wonder how the Doppler precompensation is. Like, because if this was a Hughes box, my theory would go out the window.
Oh, right.
Because you can't. That's not how they don't do the Doppler precompensation in a way that can be altered using the software. So, it's. I think a story that has credibility is one that you can. So a good theory asks questions.
Yes.
And it provides avenues of inquiry. So people come to me and say, "Oh, I think this happened." I'm like, "Okay, so what are you going to do next?" You know, you think that it flew to Diego Garcia? Like, tell me how the BFO data was generated in that case. Tell me how you would explain that the BTO data doesn't match the ping rings. Like, give me a mechanism. That's what I was trying to do with the BFO data. I'm saying the BFO data could be altered, and this is the way it could be altered.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of, it takes some care and attention. This is why YouTube is exciting to me, because you can't talk for 3 hours on TV, or you can't write a magazine article. You can write a book, but like a lot of people don't want to read a book.
That's right. People want something they can
click.
Put on the side. That's why we have on authors to talk about their books, and then people actually do buy it afterwards, but some people never will, right? They're just going to listen to it.
So I did write a book about it. That if people want to
we'll put that link in
the
description. Yeah. What's the name of the book?
It's called The Taking of MH370. I had written a book in 2015 called The Plane That Wasn't There, which is kind of a poetic way of pointing out that this plane actually disappeared 3 times. It didn't just disappear once.
Right.
But then I wanted to when I did a second edition, I wanted to like really cut to the chase. It's like, this plane was taken. This plane was definitely taken. A lot of people will, thank you. There it is.
Yeah, we'll put that link in my Amazon store
Great.
for the book, so people can click my link down there, and you'll see Jeff's book in what do we name that section? Books from the podcast or something?
Yeah, I think it's that.
Something like that. It'll be like books from the podcast or Julian Dorey's books or something like that. But
Right.
it'll be right there at the top. But one of the things they talked about in the documentary at some length that I wanted a lot more on, that you and I were talking before camera about, is the whole Blaine Allen Gibson thing.
Oh, okay.
So this, if you want to talk about like Russia and some interesting things, this guy, his presence in the case gives it some oxygen. So essentially, for people who haven't seen the documentary, there's this guy who's a self-described, and you're probably going to explain it's more than this, but he's a self-described like world adventurer, world traveler, Blaine Allen Gibson, who decided in 2015 that he wanted to find potential wreckage of MH370. And so allegedly, he's the luckiest man in the world, just incredible luck. But he talked to, I'm using his words, but he talked to quote unquote experts online who told and asked them, where's the most likely place that according to the currents, that this, if it crashed in the Indian Ocean, that it would wash up to. And at first they told him, I think, Mozambique. So he flies to Mozambique, and within
20 minutes.
Yeah, within 20 minutes, he had a piece of MH370. Just went to the right beach at the right time in the right place and got it within 20 minutes. And he's like, oh, look at this. And so then he goes to the quote-unquote experts online, doesn't say who they are once again, and he says, all right, what's the next place? And they go, Madagascar. He goes to a beach in Madagascar. I think it was within 2 hours. He had 19 pieces or something like that of MH370 allegedly.
I don't know if he got 19 that quickly, but he did wind up getting something like that eventually. But he's a magnet for this stuff.
Yes. And so this all came, what needs to be said is this all came on the heels of allegedly is it called I forget.
The flaperon.
The flaperon, which is a large piece of the plane. We can pull that image up, MH370 flaperon on, what's the name of that famous surfing island?
La Réunion.
La Réunion Island. So it washes up on shore there, and they go, oh my God, look, we have the flaperon of MH370. Now, there's two angles to this. There's whether or not this was it, and then there's Blaine coming in. So maybe actually right before Blaine, I want to bring up, you wrote a pretty unbelievable blog post at the time. I think I have it here. It was called Bioforensic Analysis of Suspected MH370 Debris, and this is the updated one, so it's the second one you did. And what you broke down was that this stuff that was found roughly like a year after on La Réunion, the sea life that existed on the flaperon could not have developed in the type of currents it would have been in and the time it would have had to do it before it washed up on shore, meaning it would have been planted, no?
So obviously, yeah, I mean, just to back up one step, I had come up with this theory that the plane could have been taken north, that it didn't go into the ocean. And as time went by and no debris washed up, people were like, there were thousands of people combing, they do beach cleanups in Western Australia and they're looking for pieces, nothing washes up. I'm like, the longer this goes on, the stranger it looks. And then, like a year and a half later, this piece washes up in the western part of the Indian Ocean that we're just talking about. And everyone's like, okay, well, Jeff is definitely wrong because we have these pieces. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm probably wrong. I actually wrote a piece saying, like, despite what I speculated about earlier, clearly the plane went to the southern Indian Ocean. Then I was like, wait a minute, let me just for my own sanity, just like convince myself that this is definitely not like somebody just ripping a piece off the plane and throwing it in the water for a little while. There were various aspects. There's the drift modeling. There's the question of like, this piece is totally covered in barnacles on every surface. And so, but barnacles only grow underwater and things can't float totally underwater. I do actually our last podcast episode was I think the one that is airing this Thursday is all about this. So, but the part that I really sank my teeth into was the question of how big are these barnacles, and because these creatures are their little larvae swim around in the ocean. They're basically plankton, And as soon as they find something that's floating, they glue their head onto it, and they stick their feet in the water, and they grab food out of the water, and they go bigger, and they grow really fast because the way they evolved is that they were attaching onto things like logs and like even pieces of seaweed that eventually decay and sink. So they haven't got a lot of time. They've got to grow, reproduce. And they have no economic value except negative economic value. If they grow on your boat, it makes your boat very slow. And so like 6 or 7 people had been studying this before I got interested in. It's called Lepus anitifera, goose barnacle. And I went really down a rabbit hole with these things.
Yeah, you're deep.
I was really deep. I will spare you the details, although I would love to spend 4 hours talking to you about Lepus anitifera and their mating cycle. But suffice to say, they grow at a certain rate. When I showed pictures of these things to experts in these barnacles, they were like, it's a month old, it's 2 months old. This plane had been crashed like 15 or 16 months before. So how come? And also the thing about lepus, like I said, anything that's floating in the ocean, they'll grab onto it. They'll start, when they find a body in the Meadowlands, they like look at the bugs.
Yeah.
And depending on the time of year.
I know a few guys that buried some bodies out there.
Hey, come on. We're at Jersey. What am I talking about here? I have to be careful. I don't want to wind up in the Meadowlands.
Yeah,
I'm not going to
okay.
disparage.
You're with me. You
all right?
pass.
I got your protection. Okay. So you can look and you can see based on what kind of bugs or how big the bugs are, if they're eggs. So the same thing. It's like a crime scene time chronology. And a woman had just published a paper when this happened that she looked at a body floating off the coast of Italy, and it had barnacles, and they were able to guess the time of death. So it doesn't match. Why? Well, if you want to think that this might have been planted, maybe it was planted. And maybe somebody took a piece. People were starting to talk about how suspicious it was that there was no debris flying. They took a piece and they put it in the water and they soaked it there for a couple months and they put it on the beach. Or you might think that we don't understand these creatures that well. Maybe they grow slower depending on the nutrients that are available in the water. There might just be something we don't know. Maybe it was floating along, and then a turtle came and ate all of the lepus, and then they had to start again from scratch, something like that. There might be an innocent explanation. In all of these theories and all of the evidence that we have, you can always either say it was a coincidence or there's an innocent explanation, or it's actually evidence of what I'm talking about. You know what I'm saying? So everything has to be taken in context. But then for a long time, we only had this one piece. This was an amazing piece, by the way. This piece had serial numbers on the inside that allowed investigators to definitively link it to MH370. It had these great, fully grown, fresh barnacles that could allow you to not only tell how old the barnacles were, but as the barnacles flow through water of different temperature, it shows up in the composition of the shell. So scientists can use the shell almost like a data recorder to tell them how warm the water is. And that they were hoping to use that to tell them what part of the seventh arc that the plane crashed in. Didn't work because the shells were too young.
But there's also, I forget what it's called, there's a plate on the inner part of the flaperon that is supposed to have a unique identifier that was convenient, that would have actually officially identified that Boeing 777 that was MH370, but it was conveniently not there.
So it was missing. And so this, again, is one of these things where, like, is it just innocent that this piece, because this piece it's kind of beat up. You can tell the whole, like, trailing edge of it had been, like, kind of worn away or ripped off.
They did a good job.
It was kind of, it was messed up. And so would floating in the ocean cause this nameplate to fall off or not? I mean, it's up to you to decide how suspicious you think that is. The point is that even without that plate, they were able to put an endoscope into it and read the serial numbers and track it back to handwritten logs that were kept at the factory in Spain where it was made. So there's no question that this came from MH370. The plane that went missing, this flaperon is from that actual aircraft.
I misunderstood that when I read it back then. So it is, okay.
Yeah, this is from MH370.
So what you, okay, all right, hold on. Let me back up for a minute.
Okay.
Because you've written a lot on this. So obviously I misunderstood some things. What you could be saying, though, is on the basis of the biomaterial found on it from the ocean, seeing as the timelines and environments it would have had to go through do not seem to line up according to your analysis, that it could have been taken from wherever the jet was taken, placed into the Indian Ocean to wash up.
Yeah, that's the idea. And then that's all we have for a long time. There's only that one piece, and it's like got this weird barnacle situation going on.
Okay.
So,
and then how long until Blaine comes in the picture? This is, what was this, June 2015 or March 2015?
I think this is July 2015.
When this was found?
Yeah. So it's been a year, not quite a half.
Yep, 16 months.
And then, so that's July, and then Blaine shows up, I think it's January or February of 2016. Now, Blaine had been on my radar before because I had a discussion. I had jeffwise.net is my website, and people were commenting, and there was a kind of a community of people discussing the various possibilities. And he had reached out to me saying, I'm this independent guy. I'm looking around. I'm talking to people. I'm like going here and there and the other thing. He had this weird theory involving, there was like supposedly this material that could melt metal. And like maybe if you spilled it on a plane, it would melt the metal. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I thought he was an odd bird, frankly. And then he reaches out to me in February and he says, "Oh, I've got this piece," and then he tells me the whole story. And I interviewed him at the time, and I was like, I reported what he told me, and the 20-minute part definitely struck me as odd. And then he wound up collecting a lot of pieces. Now, this piece is called No Step. I don't know if it doesn't have any identifying numbers.
The piece we have on the screen right here?
In the upper left, he's holding No Step.
That. Okay.
Yeah. And he even sent a video of the thing floating so you could see how it floated. It's interesting. He found it on a sandbar that was awash. And some fishermen from Mozambique had taken him there. He had said, "Where's a place to find debris?" And they said, this sandbar. So they went to the sandbar, and he found it, or another guy found it and handed it to him. It's interesting because this when investigators searched it, closely examined this piece later, we didn't know this for many years later until the final report was issued. They found remnants of shells and things that had been living on this, but none of them were remained. Like if there had been lepus on it, they had been scoured off. So the thing about, not to obsess about lepus antiphora barnacles, but they only live in the open ocean, and the minute they wash ashore, they die. The one that was found on Reunion Island had just washed ashore, so it was fresh, and these things were still probably alive. But very quickly, they get eaten by seagulls, by crabs, things like that. And so this piece that he found looked like something that had been stripped of its sea life. He found it it had just washed ashore. It was on a sandbar that was awash. So to be in the condition it was in, it would have to have washed ashore, getting picked over by predators, and then washed back out, and then found by him. And all of the pieces, there were a couple of others that wound up having healthy sized lepus on them, maybe one or two others. Everything else, there's about 3 dozen, I think, that were potentially part of MH370 that were collected, most of them by Blaine. But none of them had the kind of sea life that would tell us how long they'd been in the water.
So he had reached out to you, as you said, but now he starts going very public with his story in 2016, and you start looking into him more. And this is what was interesting, because if you watch the documentary, I agree with you 100% with my first impression. The guy's an odd bird.
Right.
This is not a normal person. And then when you see the veracity of the claims that he's making, and then he did really find this stuff,
right? And
that he found it quickly. Even if, let's say he's an exaggerator and he said 20 minutes and it was really 4 hours, he's still, the fact that he went to the right place and was right there and got it, it's crazy to me. And they did talk about, and had him respond to it in the documentary, some odd ties in this case to Russia, which do appear weird. But you found that and much more when you looked into him. I imagine this is like 2016. You really start digging into like, who is this guy?
Well, in my conversation with him, he was telling me about his life as an adventurer, and he talked about how he had gone every kind of great mystery. He had tried to solve it himself, and one of the great mysteries was Tunguska, the meteorite that hit in Siberia in 1911 or something.
Okay.
And it's a great mystery. It's fascinating that something happened in the sky and all this great area of taiga got flattened. And to this day, nobody knows. It's widely believed to have been a kind of a meteor that exploded. So in talking about how he tried to solve that mystery, he mentioned in passing that he speaks such fluent Russian that he could go to a bar and like talk to people and get like intel from them about where to look for the meteor. And I was like, holy shit, Russian is hard. I've been studying, here's a confession. I have been doing Duolingo Russian since 2014.
Wow. How's that coming?
Terrible. It's really, really hard. It has crazy verb structures. It was almost designed to terrorize the students of language. But so when he said I can talk to people in bars, I was like, that was a red flag to me, because that means you have like a deep investment in this country. And so now he also says that he can speak French. He says that he can speak like 4 languages. He's in some of his documentaries he's been in, he speaks French. He speaks very bad French, in my opinion. So maybe he's not fluent in Russian. Maybe that's one of his tall tales. But if he is fluent in Russian, this is a guy with like serious Russian connections, because you don't accidentally wind up speaking Russian. So I did a little bit of searching around. It turns out there's public records in the state of Washington, where he's from, that he founded a company in 1991 with these 2 Russian business partners in this city that's like an industrial, it's kind of like Ohio of Russia. And it was called Siberia Pacific, and it was still he'd been paying his annual dues to the state of Washington every year since all this time. This was a going business. It had an address and a phone number and everything. I mean, it was just him, I guess. So he was a lawyer. He is a lawyer. And I did some research. I'm like, what was he doing in Russia for these years? And I guess he was there. So the Soviet Union collapsed in the wall came down in 89, and then various things happened. 91. Right? Yeah, I myself I was living in the Far East at the time, and in 91, there were these things called secret. I'm going to call them secret cities, but I think I might be getting them wrong. Anyway, there were cities that you could not go to if you were a foreigner because they had nuclear plants in them. I, at the time, met some people from Vladivostok, and they were like, come to Vladivostok. So I did. And I spent some time there, and I wound up hungover. I don't know why.
That's what happens.
How or why. But I woke up with a terrible hangover in Vladivostok. And like I said, I like Russians. I like Russia. It's a fascinating country. It's like kind of the twin, like the opposite twin of the United States. Like if you look at where we lie in the world in our history, like we expanded west and they expanded east, and we both wound up on the Pacific. There's obviously differences, but there's some interesting similarities. And so what was I talking about?
You woke up with a hangover.
I woke up with a hangover. Oh, yeah. So I was interested in Russia, and he had this company. Oh, what was he doing? So in 91, a lot of these cities that had been, they were forbidden. Basically, you couldn't go to them. They had nuclear plants in them. The Soviet Union obviously was very secretive. And so they were trying to encourage investment at this time. A lot of the problems of Russia today were seeded at that time because the United States went in with this terrible advice. So he was a lawyer who was going around Russia offering advice to people who wanted to do business at the time. But he had a very specific knowledge of the legal system of Russia. And he took part in a State Department sponsored conference where he talked about the problems of doing business in this kind of city. And I called up the guy who ran the conference, and I was like, what is Blaine Gibson like? Like, what's his deal? And this fellow said that he didn't really remember because it was a long time ago, but that it struck him that Blaine was different from most of the presenters in that he actually had gone out into the field and he spent a lot of time in small areas. He knew he didn't just go to the main towns like Moscow and Irkutsk, but he went to the little ones too. And so he had he was impressed by his knowledge and his like real in-depth understanding of Russia. Which is fine, which is great. I totally relate to that. I think it's great that Blaine was so engaged in such an interesting country. He had been in the State Department for a while. His father was the Blaine's dad was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of California.
Oh,
his father was actually kind of a historic figure because he was part of the court that had ruled the detention of Japanese citizens illegal, unconstitutional.
Whoa.
So he's actually, and he served for many, many years on the Supreme Court. So Blaine is a really interesting guy. But then he appears in 2016 as this guy wearing...
The camera. Move it to the side. You like moved it to the right.
this?
Move it to the right.
Like
there
that?
you go.
All right, sorry. Go ahead.
So he shows up in 2016 as this sort of wearing an Indiana Jones jacket and hat, describing himself as this kind of feckless adventurer who kind of wanders around the globe trying to solve mysteries, and this is just the mystery that he wants to solve. And he seems like this kind of naive, innocent waif. He's just this like odd bird is kind of a word. He's like, nobody knows where he lives. He won't tell anybody. He's very secretive about what his whole deal is. And he's denying that he has any connection to Russia. He's like, oh, I tried to get involved in the tourist business in the Far East.
Because everyone does that.
Because everyone does that. This is a guy who, if you're a journalist, the hair on the back of your neck.
Oh yeah.
Starts to go on.
Yeah, it's blaring. So how much do you want to, because we talked off camera about some stuff, but I know you want to stay with things that you have hard evidence for, but how much do you want to go into some of the background that you think you've uncovered on him?
I don't want to get into that. I have to think carefully about it. He's not entirely who he seems to be. And I don't want to sort of paint any pictures or anything. Suffice to say, this denial of his connections to Russia are inaccurate. I think I understand why he wants to move away from associations with Russia, especially in the wake of my, potential, dot connecting about the spoof theory. It is interesting that in the if you watch the Netflix documentary, The Plane That Disappeared, he says, oh, some people say I'm a spy for Russia. Some people say I'm a spy for China. And I watched that and I'm like, Blaine, nobody is saying you're a spy for China. These aren't just baseless things that are coming from every direction.
So he's inserting.
But he's like kind of creating this like straw man. Oh, people are making all kinds of crazy accusations about me. And it really was, I said to the producers, I'm in this documentary a lot and I talked to them a lot. I had told them a lot of what appeared on screen, but they never gave me, I had no control. I never knew what they were going to air. And I had no say into how they presented things. So I would have loved if they would have asked him some hard questions and put it on the screen. But I think their goal, if you watch it, is they want to make every theory seem equally
they want to make it open-ended. So it's mysterious. And that's a part, as a downside of the entertainment side of what you have to do in documentary culture today.
Right.
But yeah, I think I'll just say from some of the stuff we talked about off camera, sinister is definitely a word that comes to mind with him. I also look at him, I've had spooks sitting here in this seat, so sometimes I try to think like how they think and stuff. He does have a very useful spooky profile, meaning he could also be used by other places because of what it looks like, because guys like you are going to find it, right? You're going to find weird connections to Russia, and people are going to be like, oh, great, this is going to look like a Russian connection.
Right.
So that thought goes into my head too, but that's the thing with espionage. Everything is a potential honeypot of like, honeypot's not the word, but everything is a potential trap of reverse psychology on reverse psychology on reverse psychology, and you can go crazy trying to read it. But there's no doubt that at the core, at the center of this story that Blaine has inserted himself into by finding some of these pieces,
Right.
You can't deny the espionage nature that exists potentially around him.
Yeah, when you're standing on quicksand,
Mm-hmm.
it can be very hard to know what is true and what is not. And the only thing you can really do is to try to establish whether this person is what they're telling you is internally consistent. And so if they are telling one story on Tuesday and a different story on Wednesday about the same thing, you know that something's up. They are not a reliable source. And you have to wonder, like, why are they being inconsistent?
Yes.
I mean, if somebody's on the stand in a trial, right, the
Yes.
lawyer wants to do the same thing. Are you lying then or are you lying now?
Yeah. And that's probably like the biggest part of your job when you're working multifaceted stories from all different types of people around the case. You're trying to see if things line up because that's how you get it multi-sourced. Right?
Exactly.
So, but yeah, the other bizarre thing that bothers me about this case that I'm not sure I've ever seen like a great explanation for, I don't know if you looked into it, is the whole cell phone thing with the
Right.
passengers. So I forget what it was. Maybe you can look it up, Alessi, but I want to say it was like 2 days later or something like that.
Yeah.
They were getting full rings. Like families of passenger members were getting full rings, and then in the like holding room or whatever you want to call it, where they had all the families of the passengers at the location where they were making all these announcements.
Right.
At one point, the phone of the father who was on the plane
Right.
was ringing on his kid's phone, and they're like, "Oh my God, should I answer it?" Is there a good explanation for these things?
So that was the number one question that I got after the show aired. People were writing to my blog and to the podcast when we started it, saying, what's up with the cell phones? And unfortunately, the cell phone data has never been made public. The one thing we do know about the cell phones was that there was one cell phone ping between MH370 and a ground station near the island of Penang. We talked about how the plane had reversed course and was seen on military radar going up the Malacca Strait. The island of Penang is under its path. It actually island of Penang is where it turned as it went up the strait. It's actually coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, depending on who you ask, the hometown of Zahari Ahmad Shah. And so one theory
He was trying to wave his hometown goodbye.
He tilted the plane to the right and saw I mean, maybe. But so the co-pilot's cell phone connected with a tower. Now, how that happened is, again, one of these mysteries within the mystery. Because a plane, you wouldn't think if a plane is at 36,000 feet or whatever, that it would be possible for a cell phone to connect with a tower, and yet it did. And so that is, well, for one thing, it proves that the plane that was seen on military radar, which doesn't come with a tag associated with it, so people speculated, well, maybe it wasn't really MH370. Well, the co-pilot's cell phone was on that plane, so it had to be. But as far as it's a story of a woman said, oh, my dad's calling. What should I do? Well, you tell me. Your dead dad is calling you on your cell phone. What would you do? How do you even ask? Why are you asking somebody what to do? Why don't you just answer it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why would you ask that question?
Maybe logically you're 100% right. Then again, this was a shit show of a scene. And you got all these people locked in a room. They're going crazy. They think their loved ones are dead, but they're not sure. No one's telling them where the plane is. And you know how you like,
I know.
you freeze?
Human behavior, like we said earlier, you can't explain human behavior.
Yes.
Anything is plausible. We only have this story third hand. It's hearsay. All of these stories, they're all kind of third hand. People ask me about it all the time, and all I can say is, I don't know. I don't know if there's any substance to these things or not. I have no data. I can't really speculate, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, because at the middle of this, and I always try to remember this too, and sometimes I'm guilty of it too. We get lost in it, but
Yeah.
you know, you have 239 people who died. You have 239 families who have no closure for their relatives being gone. They're never going to see them again, and you know, we can get so caught up in trying to solve the case sometimes, and a part of it is, you know, it's this giant mystery. There's a part of it that's fun. I can't deny that,
Right.
but you know, I can't even imagine being any of those people who, you know, you saw people who lost their families on there, like their I think like wife and kids or husband and kids, and it's like,
I know.
you know, that 10 years on, that pain doesn't go away.
Well, this is why accident investigations are done at all, is because it's as sucky as it is for the loved ones. At least we could try to prevent it from happening again. And in late 2014, CBS called me into their studio and they were like, okay, we want to ask you what we can learn from MH370 so that it doesn't happen again. And I said, nothing, because we don't know what happened to this plane. You can't get on a plane and say with 100% certainty that I won't vanish into thin air, because it has happened and it remains unexplained.
Well, can there be a new type of system, for example, with the transponder not having a 3-minute, you know, overlap of nothingness in between countries or something like that? Can't we fix something in the system there?
MH370 could not happen today. The exact thing that happened to MH370 could not happen today.
So we did learn something from it.
Well, yeah, like for instance, I mentioned that they made the GPS embedded, like it's free. But the thing is, here's the thing. If there's basically two possibilities what happened to this plane. One is pilot suicide. Have we done anything to prevent that? No. Some people have said, well, why don't we do this thing? There's a whole genre of people talking about this thing called the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, which is a way that from the ground you could take over a plane and there's nothing the pilots could do about it. For one thing, the pilots union is never going to let that happen. Secondly, nor should they, because instead of a pilot committing suicide, you can now have a dude on the ground with the uninterruptible autopilot controls killing the plane himself.
Who's to say they would know that it's possible or not, though?
What's possible?
Meaning, who's to say that the pilots union would be able to stop that without even, you know, assuming that it's like up to them whether or not that exists, but in reality, maybe on the ground it does exist and they're just not told about it.
Okay, so let's imagine that there's this technology. And it's very easy to imagine this happening. So now you have a plane that can be flown from the cockpit, but can also be flown from the ground.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a switch on the ground where I can flip the switch, and now I can fly this plane. There's nothing you can do about it up in the
Override you. Yeah.
Now, a pilot is disincentivized by crashing this plane because he'll die too, right? The guy in the ground has no disincentives.
No, none. Yeah.
And the fact that, and plus, every system can be hackable. So if you're installing a system on the plane, that means this plane can be taken over from outside somewhere else. That means theoretically, anybody who's smarter than you can crash any plane he wants. That actually does not make you safer.
No, it doesn't. But you don't think that there's, I'm not even saying now, but like that there's not the possibility that technology like that will come to exist and no one will be told about it? Like, meaning the pilots union won't be notified that, hey, guys, guess what we're working on at DARPA? Oh, forgot. Yeah. Let me let you know about that one.
To be installed widely on commercial airplanes without anybody knowing about it. I mean, you could say, just kind of playing with this off the top of my head because I hadn't really thought about it, but the MCAS that caused those 737 MAX crashes, that it's not like that nobody knew about it. Obviously, the regulators knew about its existence, but pilots weren't told about it. So this system would kick in and basically take control of the plane, and you're like, what is happening? Like, I don't know why this is happening.
Yeah, I think about it with cars a lot too. You know, with us moving to eventually self-driving cars and cars that are on a central system.
One of the areas that I've really become fascinated by and written a lot of articles about is this sort of the interface between humans and automation. I think it's going to be an increasingly important. I mean, it's the story of aviation, really. So I mean, the Everence 447 turned out to be a problem of automation that kicked in, and the human pilots didn't really fully understand it. It's like it's not going away. But I kind of like went down this side alley, sort of in passing, making a point about something else that I've now forgotten what it was.
We were talking about the ability to control the jet from the ground and how that type of technology, the pilots would never let it. Like the pilots union would never let.
Oh,
that.
you're saying like maybe the pilots union could get over it,
and would it? I'm saying maybe they wouldn't even know it happens. You know, maybe they wouldn't, and this kind of goes down like the Florence to Changy route with some things. But you know, I will say the amount that we, meaning me and everyone listening right now, and maybe you, but I won't speak for you, don't know about the type of technology that is worked on underground. I'm not talking about at Google or at Apple. I'm talking about at DARPA and organizations like that around the world. Is scary to think about sometimes. Like, how far ahead are they? And you can go crazy with the possibilities of what they have. Something as, not to oversimplify it, but I'll use this term, something as seemingly more straightforward of a concept than, say, like multiverse theory would be, being able to technologically control a plane that's in the sky right there from the ground with some technology that the person in the plane can't see, right? Some you know,
I guess
hackable code. You know what I mean?
I understand the concept of the idea, but first of all, there's no evidence. I mean, the specific theory was that this actually had been installed in MH370. There's zero evidence that it has ever been created, and certainly even less evidence that it was in MH370. But more importantly, I would sort of back up a step and say, what would be the purpose of this? Because it wouldn't increase security. It would open up a vast security vulnerability.
Oh, huge. Yeah. Huge.
So anyway, I feel like it's a dead end.
Okay, fair enough. Do you think this case, do you think that the truth of this case will always be concealed? Or do you think, you know, maybe we're sitting here 5 years from now and Jeff Wise has solved it and the government's admitted to it?
I mean, my goal at this point, which I don't think is unrealistic, is to simply get the authorities to tell me, or just to acknowledge that this idea exists. I don't know that it's true, but I think it is that the vulnerability might exist. Was it exploited? I don't even care that they tell me whether it was exploited or not. I just want you to know, how would you look at this case differently if you acknowledged that there was a vulnerability and that maybe the search area that you defined using this BFO value isn't necessarily the only possibility. Like the authorities will tell you time and time again, and not just the authorities, but people like Mike Exner who agree with the authorities. And I understand their reasons; they're not ungrounded. But for all the people who say, we know with certainty that this plane is in the southern Indian Ocean, I just want them to tell me, I've just explained to you a vulnerability. How do you know that this vulnerability wasn't? Maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe you know something about this box that I don't. Tell me what that is. It's been 10 years I've been talking about this. And don't just say this is impossible, as Mike Exner did in the documentary. Let's really grapple with it.
Right.
Take it seriously. That's all I'm saying. Take it seriously. Because you haven't found the plane. You've spent hundreds of millions of dollars. Humor me.
Yes. At this point, have you been in contact at any point recently with family members of the victims? Is that still a part of any of the reporting you're doing?
I've never, I would say never. There are a handful of relatives that I have been in communication with, not in years. I feel for them. I don't really... they're grieving. I don't know what else to say than that. Right. I can't do anything for them apart from my best efforts to solve this mystery. People do come at me. You know what it's like for people to come at you, and they'll say, "Oh, how dare you? These people are suffering.
Right?
How could you treat this mystery so callously?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?
It's your job."
It's the family members want to know what happened to their loved ones.
Yes. Your job is to investigate things like this.
It's like, let's try to figure out what happened. Like, to get back to Blaine, one of the strange things about his attitude, his sort of public position, And I've been criticized by other people in the public sphere with this same position. They're like, your theory is irresponsible. And I'm like, well, what is your theory? He's like, I don't have a theory. I'm like, well, if you don't have a theory, what are you doing? You know, you're collecting pieces of evidence without an attempt to, I don't know. Do you think it's just going to like magically fall out of the sky if you have enough pieces of evidence? You have to have a theory. You have to ideally have multiple theories and then weigh them against the evidence and sort of, you know, vary your assessment of how likely they are.
I don't disagree. I think, you know, I do think you have a decent point that there are more limits to what the possibilities are than maybe we'd first think about. And I do try not to, in spite of some other theories that have been spouted on this podcast by other people, I do try not to run to the things that are just leap on a 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 leap. And you got to challenge the theories. But it's fair to say, like, if you have one that's at least rooted in some physical data and also capabilities that could exist on, say, a Boeing 777 like this, then yeah, it's someone's got to bring that to the table. So I appreciate you doing that, and obviously you've been doing it for a lot of years. But we said the name of your podcast early on. What's the name of it again?
It's called Deep Dive MH370.
Deep Dive MH370. So you and your co-host are putting out an episode every week that's like 30, 40 minutes going through one new layer of the case, and it's open-ended. You don't know how many episodes it's going to end up being right now.
We're just slicing it into digestible chunks. We want to make it, we don't want to go too deep into it. I mean, it's a lot of the same stuff I'm talking about with you today, maybe like a little bit more detail. But you know, it's the same. My basically the point that I'm trying to make is like, we can understand so much about this case, and it's great. It's a wild ride. It really is. But you have to take it carefully. Now, the reason that you and I, our paths crossed initially is because you had this gentleman on. I don't know if you want to talk about him. Maybe you feel like
Ashton Forbes. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it before, but I'm sure people have questions.
So he got a lot. So what I've been trying to do is kind of bring this story to people's attention and try to explain what I think is like a productive way to look at this case. And time and again, this keeps bubbling back up. People have theories and they bring it forward and they come and they go. This one really blew up. I mean, this got many millions of views. And this guy was going around with this video of, it looked like 3 UFOs circling around MH370 and blipping it out through an interdimensional portal. And, you know, there's multiple things you could say about that. But the thing that really kind of blew my mind is that doesn't match what we know about this case. I mean, you and I have been talking about the 7-hour process of this plane vanishing. It didn't blip out. There's no point where the thing just went blip. This happened, this weird thing happened, then this weird thing happened, then this weird thing happened. The mystery has never been that the thing blipped out to an interdimensional thing. And so people, there was a whole, as you're very well versed in it, you know, parts of this video had previously appeared in B-roll or some cloud photos or something. There's various reasons to think that this whole thing was a hoax.
It was debunked. I will patently say that. The Corridor crew and then others after them, they debunked this.
But even
they found the creator of the clouds, by the way, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, but even before that, the story didn't make any sense. It didn't match what happened to the plane. And so I was like, to me, I was watching this going like, what? How does this information world work where so many people are hearing this guy's work and getting just misled? You know?
They want to have fun with it. They want to have fun with cases like this.
Right.
They want to have a club to be a part of. They want to have some sort of like, it's way deeper than we think.
Right.
The government's doing all of it. They know where the aliens are.
Right.
And like, man, it's wildly interesting. And I'm with you. Like there's a part of me that wants to be like, oh my God, this could be so deep.
Right.
But you have to not lose your sanity when you do that.
Right.
And when you are presented with things that are patent facts.
Right.
You can't be like, well, that's your opinion. No.
Right.
For example, the pilot's door does not have hinges on it.
Right.
That's just a fact.
Right.
It
There are
didn't back
facts.
then,
Yeah.
And there's just some people who don't want to hear that. And I don't want to like really hit them with a rim shot, but some people just don't have enough going on in their life.
Well,
You know,
yeah.
they don't, and I genuinely feel bad about that. I hope they can get away from that place. But like, this is the most exciting thing to them, and it becomes a part of their identity. We see it in our politics now too, with both sides of the aisle. Like, it becomes who you are, and you have to be this thing on the team at all times. And I was a little bit caught off guard with just the veracity and the strength of how deep that went.
Right.
When I had Ashton on, and the things people actually believed afterwards, you know. But it is what it is. You've been caught in the middle of it, like you said. I think you've handled a lot of it really, really well. And so, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of your podcast and all the
thank
reporting you
you.
do on it. But
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in, Jeff.
Well, it was my pleasure. I mean, we could easily do like another 9
We could.
hours of stuff.
We could.
But you know,
Check out
thank
the
you so much.
podcast.
I like I said, I mean, I'm in awe of what you do. You do
Thank
what you very well, and you know, it's great to have the privilege to talk to you.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll do it again sometime. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. Before you leave, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. It's a huge help. And also, if you're over on Instagram, be sure to follow the show at Julian Dorey Podcast, or also on my personal page at Julian D. Dorey. Both links are in the description below. Finally, if you'd like to catch up on our latest episodes, use the Julian Dorey Podcast playlist link in the description below. Thank you.